We'll bring the regular assembly meeting to order for January 30th, 2023. Ms. Hale, will you lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Smith, would you give us the land acknowledgement, please?
Of course, Madam Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunishish.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Walak Yadak.
Here.
Miss Wall, I don't think we have Miss Wall on. And Miss Treem,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Miss Hughes Candies,
Here.
Miss Hale,
Here.
Mr. Bryson,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Gladysevsky,
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Special order of business instructions for public participation, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So for those who were participating via Zoom, if they wish to sign up, they had to do so by 4 p.m. this evening. So we have cut off any Zoom testimony, limited to the list that has already previously signed up. There are sign-up sheets at the back of the assembly chambers for those individuals who may wish to, who are in person and may wish to sign up to testify. We do ask, due to the large number of individuals who are signing up to testify, if you have more than one item that you wish to testify, please write your name, one item, and then your name and the other item so that we're not missing anyone when we go through the list of persons wishing to testify. And at that, I will turn it back to you, Madam Mayor.
All right, and just an extra thing, if you're testifying in person, our timer is working. We believe it's been a while since we've used the timer, that at 30 seconds, it will blink yellow and then it will buzz at you when your time is done. So with that, looks like we don't have any minutes to approve. Manager's request for agenda changes.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one agenda change, and I would like to remove item 12. That's ordinance 2022-06 BAD, the ordinance appropriating 10 million for the Eagle Crest Gondola project. We have some technical issues we need to iron out on that. So I'd like to remove item 12 from the agenda. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So some of you have signed up for that item. So if you still want to testify tonight, please do so that on the non-agenda item, because we will not be covering that topic tonight. With that, public participation on non-agenda items. Let's go to our Zoom folks first. Oh, actually, none of our Zoom folks are non-agenda. While we wait for the Madam Clerk to come back, I have Ms. Tibbetts. If you will come up to our microphone there. Then you have to touch the base to make it green. And you want to set the timer? And you want to set the agenda? Please state your name and area of town you live, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Terry. I live in North Douglas, and I'm here tonight as representing the Douglas Advisory Board, and I'm the chair of the board. I've been serving since 2017. I've been the chair since 2019, and we're here to myself and the vice chair of the board are both here to talk tonight about the Douglas Island cemeteries. Just real briefly, in April of 2021, the board, the Douglas Advisory Board, submitted a letter and a packet of backup material to the assembly members and to staff about the idea of taking over the Douglas Island cemeteries, inviting the city and borough of Juneau to take over maintenance and ownership of the cemeteries. Currently, there are 10 cemeteries on Douglas Island, 2 of which the owners have offered to basically turn over to the city and borough for no charge, so there would be no purchase price. We've been pursuing the issue for since 1983. There have been efforts on behalf of the city and borough of Juneau to investigate the process for taking over ownership and maintenance. The board, it has been a priority of the board since I've been on the board since 2017. And we've sent letters and have made numerous attempts to contact or to engage in the communications with the city on the topic, but we haven't heard anything back. So it was decided at our last meeting in November that we would come forth and we would start attending assembly meetings that speak at public testimony as an effort to try to light a fire, I guess, under the assembly to at least address this issue. Is this green light mean my time is up?
No.
Okay,
Yep,
so
we still have time. Green is good.
So anyway, there you have a letter in front of you. You have 2 letters in front of you. One that was written, approved by the board in November of this last year, and then also the one that we submitted April 22nd, 2021. And both letters offer a pretty comprehensive review of what we're talking about and what we're asking for. And as assembly appointed board members, we're just really hoping that we can send a letter and make these statements and get a response from the assembly. We haven't had any responses to our letters that we've written. And so I guess tonight my ask would be, 1 is to consider this and get back to us. And 2, my second ask would be to help us understand how we can best communicate with the assembly so that we can get response and establish communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Tibbet? Mr. Smith?
Madam Mayor, Ms. Tibbet, what would be your estimate for the ongoing cost of maintaining the cemeteries if the city were to take them over, or whatever the right word is?
Ms. Tibbet?
Thanks for the chair. Thanks for the question through the chair. I would just draw your attention to the letter on top, the one dated January 30th, 2023, and several paragraphs down. There's some references to municipal reports that estimate an initial cleanup by a contractor costing $10,500. Labor costs that were indicated in 2019 were estimated at $21,600. And of course, with inflation, the price would be higher and the shortage of available workers might slow the effort. But that's what we know so far. And the Vice Chair, Ed Schoenfeld, who follows me in this testimony, could maybe answer more comprehensively.
Thank you. Anything further? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have Mr. Schoenfeld. Would you please state your name and area of town you live in for the record? And you have 3 minutes. And it looks like Ms. Tibbet left the mic on for you, so you're all
Yep.
good.
Thank you. My name is Ed Schoenfeld. I live in Douglas. We have a Facebook group by that name, by the way, if anybody cares. Essentially, I'm here as Vice Chair of the Douglas Advisory Board. I've lived in Juneau about 44 years, most of that time in Douglas, which means in another 5 or 10 years, I get to be an official Douglas old timer. Takes a while. So the issue of the cemeteries is near and dear to all of us. And it seems to come down to a point where officials say it costs too much or it's too difficult to do this. And I understand that. But why should people who are buried in Douglas be considered second-class citizens to people who are buried at Evergreen Cemetery in Juneau and some other spots? We have these 2 groups, the Catholic Church and the Eagles, among the 10 plots there, who are ready to give this over, quick claim basically free and clear. They've done some work to keep those going. Some of the other ones are in worse shape. Actually, a lot of them are in worse shape. I'm guessing if anybody went here who hasn't wandered around Douglas a lot, went looking for the old Douglas City Cemetery, you wouldn't find it because it's behind a house. It's along Lawson Creek Road. There's no sign. There's only 1 or 2 markers on it visible. But people right across the street in the native cemetery, folks, volunteers there have been working very hard to try to upgrade that one. And they've done a little digging, not deep digging, but poking around, and they've found headstones and they found other markers, monuments. And we know there's more information out there, possibly in the old Douglas records, about who's there. So bottom line is, what we're asking for is the city to take a serious look, the assembly to take a serious look at taking responsibility for these cemeteries. And it's not, this is not starting from scratch. In the late teens, city staff put together some reports that estimated cost, that estimated, that also talked about the ownership. And according to at least one of the memos I read, it appeared that at least some of the land had already been turned over to the city. It was going to take a little more work, and it lost steam. The effort lost steam, and that's kind of, so it got lost. So again, I would remind you all that it's important to recognize, it's important to honor our dead. It's important to understand that people who are buried in one part of town shouldn't be second-class citizens to people who are buried in other parts of town. And it wouldn't cost a huge amount of money in the larger scope of what's being spent for other items.
Perfect
Thank you.
timing. Any questions for Mr. Schoenfeld? Thank you for your testimony tonight. Okay, continuing on my list, I have Kim Metcalf for a non-agenda item. Ms. Metcalf, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. My name is Kim Metcalf. I live at the top of Gold Street in the Basin Road neighborhood. As you know, I've tried for years to limit traffic on the bridge because of the effect that traffic has on our neighborhood. I wanted to testify tonight on the recent rock slide on the Trestle Bridge. The rock slide damaged the bridge, and I'm hopeful that it will take time to repair. This is my dream come true, to have the bridge free of vehicular traffic. I've walked the road several times since the rock slide, and it's really wonderful to not have to dodge cars speeding up there. And speeding there is anything over 10 miles an hour. The bridge is at 5 miles an hour. So I think the city should take this opportunity to close the road to all vehicles except those of the CBJ and AEL&P. As I've testified last summer in 1 week between June 16th and the 23rd, there were 5,008 vehicles that accessed Basin Road. That's 2654 one-way trips because the road's a dead end and the vehicles have to go up and back. On the Friday of that week, there were 499 one-way trips, totaling 998 vehicles traversing the narrow road that goes in front of our homes. I've brought copies of the Speedwagon report for the Assembly. If you could just pass those down, thank you. They had the Speedwagon up there for that week in the middle of June. The Trestle Bridge is one problem, but it's not the first rock slide on the bridge. Tom Matisse, the CBJ Emergency Programs Manager, was quoted in the Empire as saying, quote, "This is not an uncommon event. It's simply a big rock that came down the hillside." The article went on to say, quote, "According to city hazard maps, the site is considered to be in both an avalanche and landslide zone." And I recall several vehicles over the years that have been damaged by rocks coming off the mountain. And just about a year ago this week, there was an avalanche that caused a huge section of the Perseverance Trail to be taken out. Just to point out that the area is geologically unstable. And the road between the Trestle Bridge and the Steel Bridge is unstable. There's no guardrails on a significant portion of the road, and it's eroding. The road is failing there. I think the city should be concerned about the safety considerations of allowing huge numbers of vehicles to use the road. The road's closed during the winter months from November through May. And I'm asking that you seriously consider closing the road year-round to vehicles other than the CBJ and AEL&P. Accommodations can be made for those who are not physically able to access the road. A vehicle-free Basin Road would be a wonderful thing for walkers, hikers, and cyclists. People can add an extra mile to their exercise routines by parking elsewhere and walking or biking to the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Metcalf? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And then next we have Mr. Kroll. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Steve Kroll. I live at 875 Basin Road. I too want to talk about Basin Road. I've lived there for 37 years. It's basically unsafe to be a pedestrian on Basin Road. When I leave my home, I have to look both ways to make sure I'm not going to be hit by a car. I live on the corner towards the end of Basin Road where the houses are. There's a blind curve there. The road is posted for 10 miles an hour. It's very seldom that people drive 10 miles an hour. If there's traffic from both directions, it means the closing speed is 20 miles an hour. There's actually room for 2 cars to get by each other on that road if both cars are driving carefully and are driving about 5 miles an hour so that they have time to respond to each other. When people are driving faster than that, especially because very few people will admit that you could drive in a lane there, they tend to come head to head. And so anytime people do that, you then have folks who are trying to decide who's going to pull over, who's going to back up. It's more dangerous when somebody has to back up, which is often the case. And that ties up traffic even further. We have a lot of traffic on the road through the winter, but of course, when summer comes, there's more traffic. And I really think that the Assembly and streets need to look at that and think about it as a public safety issue. I would prefer that the road was closed past the Trestle Bridge, but I think the real question is how are we going to adequately provide for safety? And I think we've been pretending all these years that it's somehow safe. I'm only happy that nobody's died yet, but I raised 2 young children there. And this summer, my daughter's coming back to visit. She's going to have 2 young children. And literally, if somebody doesn't have their hand when they come out of my walkway to get onto the street, they're in danger. Everybody who walks on that street is in danger, especially children and pets, but everyone is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Kroll? Thank you for your testimony tonight. So that is the last non-agenda item I see. Although Madam Clerk, let's go to Mr. Spratt to see if he wants to speak about ordinance 2022-06 BAD, since we pulled that from the agenda. See if he still wants to speak to that, and he's on Zoom.
Mr. Spratt, you were unmuted if you would like to speak at this time.
Thank you. Sorry for the waste of time. I do not want to speak tonight. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Well, moving on, then we will move on to our agenda. So with that, we will move to the consent agenda. Are there any public requests for consent agenda changes other than ordinances for introduction? Seeing none, are there any assembly requests for consent agenda changes? Seeing none, Ms. Vlashevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move the consent agenda as written and ask for unanimous consent. I'd note that the Human Resources Committee discussed resolution 3020 and forwarded a recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Gladishevsky. Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. So that brings us to public hearing. Item 11, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Resolution 3011, a resolution adopting cruise ship tourism policy objectives from the Visitor Industry Task Force final report.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The Visitor Industry Task Force met in 2019 and 2020. The final report was delivered in March of 2020. The Assembly accepted but never formally adopted the VITF recommendations or the overarching policy objectives because the immediate challenges of COVID-19 required the Assembly's full attention. Staff's approach to date has been to deal with VITF recommended issues as they arrive. Even without adopting the specific recommendations from the VITF final report, the management of cruise ship tourism in the community would benefit from the Assembly adopting the 5 overarching policy objectives in this resolution. Assembly Committee of the Whole discussed this topic on November 28, 2022. Assembly took public testimony on this resolution at its January 9, 2023 meeting and moved it to this meeting to allow for additional public comment. I recommend you receive additional public comment and adopt this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So with that, we will go to public comment, and our first person to speak will be Carla Hart. Would you please bring over Ms. Hart? Ms. Hart, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carla Hart and I live on the Back Loop Road. I hope that you will all have had a chance to look at the emails I sent to you this afternoon. I think it's critical that you know, and the public knows you know, of a serious cost of the cruise industry that should compel you to impose a 4-ship limit for 2023 or greater, and initiate studies and planning to mitigate going forward. If you only want to hear the positive narrative, it won't prevent you from being walloped by the truths from which you wish to hide. This quote is from an Australian academic. This evening, I'm going to share from the 2022 Port of Juneau application for grant funding to install shore power. I've taken excerpts. The economic benefits of tourism are offset by the congestion, noise, and pollution associated with so many visitors. Air quality impairment has been shown to affect workers, residents, and travelers. The Port of Juneau is surrounded by the neighborhoods of downtown Juneau, West Juneau, and Douglas. 7 of Juneau schools and 1 University of Alaska campus are within 1.5 miles of the port, as is the federal office building and the state office building and city hall. The Port of Juneau is centrally located, and any emissions generated in the port impacts nearby residents, students, travelers, office workers, cruise industry, longshore workers, and cruise ship workers. When the population factors of Juneau downtown were quantified, it was found that many vulnerable groups are likely experiencing health impacts from living in close proximity to these cruise ships. A recent review of health impacts notes that gaseous and particulate components of cruise ship air pollution can have a detrimental effect on human health. SOx and NOx can cause premature death from lung cancer and cardiovascular disease and morbidity such as asthma. Specific vulnerable groups include children, the elderly, and people with respiratory and cardiovascular disease. Clinical studies have particularly implicated particulate matter air pollution on health. Particulate matter emitted from ship engines burning diesel fuel or heavy fuel oil is primarily composed of small solids or liquid droplets suspended in the air and is associated with increased overall cardiovascular and respiratory mortality. The rate of lung and bronchus cancers was 37% higher for the Alaska Native population than it is for non-Hispanic white population, and is the leading cause of non-gender specific cancer in CBJ. Health impacts will be reduced as shoreside power will help mitigate exposure to contaminants. For example, addressing emissions and particles will reduce exposure to ingestion, inhalation of known carcinogens. Reducing exposure to environmental toxins will result in a healthier maritime workforce and downtown community and help reduce disproportionate health impacts to the high percentage of vulnerable people living in the target areas. This is all taken straight out of a CBJ grant document trying to get shore power for cruise ships. on a,
Ms. Hart, the time is done, so please wrap up with the next 10 seconds.
okay. It's about $17.25 million worth of health impacts in the year 2023 if you all don't do anything.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you. Any questions for Ms. Hart? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. With that, we will also stay on Zoom to Ms. Schrader. Please bring her over.
Good evening, Assembly members and staff. My name is Susan Schrader, and I have lived in Juneau over 31 years and currently reside in West Juneau. I hope you have had time to read and digest the comments that I emailed you last Thursday concerning Resolution 3011. Please allow me to very quickly summarize my three major points. First, the Visitor Industry Task Force was badly lopsided from the get-go to favor cruise ship industry interests. And as a result, that bias taints all of the task force recommendations. Second, the third whereas is in desperate need of editing. Impacts from the cruise ship visitor industry do negatively affect many residents' quality of life. There is nothing potential about it. And last, many residents believe that 5 cruise ships per day is too many. The 2021 tourism survey cited 4.2 ships as the preferred average, while more respondents to that survey wanted 4 or fewer ships than those who wanted 5 or more. Again, please review my written comments for more details on these 3 points. So let's look ahead for a minute. Let's envision that we're coming up on Juneau's 4th of July celebration 2023. With COVID behind us and hopefully with the sun shining, we'll enjoy the parade in downtown. We'll chase that parade to Douglas. We'll play on Sandy Beach as our hot dogs are roasting on the grills. And we'll revel in these activities with our families, our neighbors, our friends, and 27,363 cruise ship passengers and crew. Yes, you heard me correctly. CLAA's schedule shows 6 cruise ships in the harbor that day, carrying a combined passenger and crew total of 27,363. If the ships are running near capacity. Well, too bad for Juneau that the 4th of July this year falls on a Tuesday. And too bad that our elected officials have delayed taking action decade after decade to proactively manage cruise ship tourism. I respectfully suggest that now is the time to get serious and listen to the residents you have been elected to represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Schrader? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. So we'll go into the room. Next, we have Mr. Laity. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bill Leedy, 227 Gastineau. Many of us here, in addition to Carla's concern about air quality, are trying to optimize the experience that we have and the visitors have in enjoying this wonderful place to be sure that we don't exceed our carrying capacity. I agree with that. We here, citizens and assembly and CBJ staff, as citizens of Juneau, Alaska, the US and the globe, have a far bigger opportunity and obligation. Because when we built the city docks and encouraged the cruise ship industry to grow only a few years ago, we knew that global climate change was a problem. We understood it. Only by now do we realize it's become an emergency. And so therefore, we have a responsibility to minimize, reduce as much as we can the greenhouse gas emissions from the cruise ship industry, which both the ships and the shore side is very energy intensive. So I've provided for you, the Leedy Foundation undertook the spreadsheet project back in October of last year. And I've got some extra copies if anyone would like. It looks like in 2022, based on the cruise ship schedule, the cruise ships burned about 200 million gallons of fossil fuel just aboard the ships. Shoreside activities, the buses, the smaller marine vessels, aviation, may have added another 50 million gallons throughout the area. The opportunity we have now, given our leverage, is to encourage the acceleration of the decarbonization of the entire green Southeast Alaska cruise ship industry. And an idea emerged back in May called Green Corridor for the Southeast Alaska. And Alex Pierce, of course, is our expert on that and has been very helpful to me in trying to think through this. Also, I'm on the advisory committee for the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. This is an effort to compete for $1 billion worth of DOE money to build a hydrogen hub in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, the competition is California, Texas, and everywhere else. But if we could help us on the advisory committee define Pacific Northwest as including Southeast Alaska, perhaps, at least as a customer. The purpose of this spreadsheet is to show you that the equivalent in hydrogen fuel for 200 million gallons of fossil fuel is a very large amount of hydrogen. This is a very large potential market if the cruise ship industry were to convert from fossil fuel to, say, clean hydrogen, greenhouse gas emission free. So we can study this at a later time. We have now in this room the power to do something about this. Of course, the ideal output is for you to accept the measure before you, 3011, I think it is. And then having done that, move beyond that in our thinking. What can we do next? Obviously, we could limit access to the port to only those ships that are burning clean fuel. No fossil-free ships. Well, that would inflict a lawsuit and the collapse of the industry on it. What can we do that's more creative than that? Let's talk about that. Then we need to transform all the shoreside application too. And I think there's a way we can do that. Finally, after you take action, please write a letter to the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Association and to me as a advisory committee member, and I'll try to nudge forward my suggestion already that PNW H2 should include Southeast Alaska cruise ship industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Extra copies if anyone wants one.
Ms. Glaszewski.
Just a question about the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. If you could get us information about what that is and what kind of letter you would like and how it would help, that would be helpful.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you for your testimony tonight.
Thank you.
Next I have Ms. Metcalf.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Assembly once again. My name is Kim Metcalf. I live at 730 Gold Street. I'm here to testify on the Visitor Industry Task Force report dated March 2020. I'd first like to comment on the process. While I applaud members of the task force for putting in a tremendous amount of time, the task force was heavily weighted with industry supporters, as has been pointed out before. I would have liked to have seen a group that was made up of persons on both sides of the issue. The task force report states that, quote, in the past, CBJ has been too reactive when issues arise. Moving forward, CBJ, the visitor industry, and the community should proactively and collaboratively plan and act to ensure Juneau remains an attractive place to live and visit, unquote. I admit I have been reactive, but only because over many years, the Assembly leadership has put the industry before residents. Yes, let's proactively and collaboratively plan. I'd like to think that I can ask my residentially zoned neighborhood not be inundated with commercial activities around cruise ship tourists and think our city officials take my concerns seriously. The coming year, the prediction is for 1.6 million visitors. I think that's at least 500,000 visitors too many. We have a carrying capacity problem. Downtown is physically too small with narrow streets that were built during a time when there were probably 7,500 or fewer residents and very few visitors. The vehicle traffic of today during the cruise ship season is completely out of control. It's dangerous. And as our city leaders, you should be looking for ways to reduce the number of vehicles and pedestrians in the downtown area. We need to limit the number of visitors, not encourage more. Health and safety issues are a good basis for limiting the number of cruise ships. Even 4 ships a day is too many, in my opinion, especially when some of today's ships carry 8,000 passengers and crews. The report recommends that the Tourism Best Management Program should be augmented and supported by the CBJ and states, quote, TBMP remains an industry-driven and operated program. As an industry program, peer and industry pressure achieves compliance that would be difficult to obtain under a regulatory regime, unquote. I disagree with that statement. I believe the CBJ should be the regulatory body and should be in charge of regulating the cruise ship industry. The cruise ship industry is insatiable. They will continue to pour ships and people into Juneau if we don't stand up to them and say no more. In the coming years, other neighborhoods are going to be disrupted by cruise ship tourism. Homeowners on the Loop Road, Back Loop Road, and the Skaters Cabin areas will be heavily impacted. The U.S. Forest Service implements plans to build boat docks, a new visitor center, and new parking lots in the Mendenhall Glacier area. Residents of North Douglas could see an onslaught of vehicle traffic on their road once the gondola is installed and tour activities
You need
increase
to
there.
wrap up, Ms. Metcalf.
Yes, thank you, I will. I'm just saying now is the time to put the brakes on the industry. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Metcalf. You mentioned carrying capacity, and I've thought about this before. Has there ever been a study or a number about, optimal numbers of cruise ship passengers for Juneau?
Not that I recall. We have asked many times to have an independent analysis done of the cruise ship industry, not hiring somebody that's a local firm or even a statewide firm, probably someone that has no connection at all with the industry. And that, to my knowledge, has never been done. I would like to see a really good analysis of the numbers and the impact on our community. I'd like to know what our community spends to host the tourism industry. This is not without a cost to us. In addition to the quality of life costs that, it's really impacting. My neighborhood has for years. The Thane neighborhood's another one that's just completely impacted by the industry. And I don't think downtown should bear the weight of all this traffic. It's just too much for us. And I don't want to see anybody else have to bear the weight of it either. Auk Bay doesn't want them. That's even in the tourism report. They don't want them in Auk Bay and Saddle Harbor. So that's probably the only place other than the other side of Douglas that's got a big enough area to host a cruise ship. The answer is to
I'm going
limit
to
it.
stop it because the question's been answered. Any further questions? Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your testimony. And next we have Ms. McCarthy. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. My name is Catherine McCarthy. I live at 414 3rd Street, which is downtown, basically, or maybe the uptown neighborhood. I want to address the issue again of the tourism task force and the numbers of people and ships that we are going to ultimately decide is appropriate for our community. When the cruise ship industry first became an entity here in Southeast Alaska, we were pretty surprised, those of us who've lived here for a long time. I was always very much in favor of tourism. And in fact, I thought that tourism would be a really good way to maintain our economy and provide for the needs of our community and our city. But I can't tell you how shocked I was when I went downtown and saw the first cruise ship which was one of the big Van Dam cruise ships, and it was sort of blotting out the sun, just like they do now, you know, when they're docked up near the library. But that doesn't mean that I'm opposed totally to tourism, or that I don't want to see us to have a viable tourist industry. I just think that it's easy, and it was easy. It was very easy to just turn ourselves over to the cruise ship industry. And I think that we need to do hard things. Hard things are not, those are the things that you don't want to do, that are not easy to do. This is not an easy thing to do. And I want us to do the hard thing, which is to make the decisions about how we're going to deal with the fact that we have one road out of town, and we have Glacier Marine Lines. We have any number of other large trucks and gas companies and other big motorized vehicles driving down that road, along with the continued problem of many very old and very smelly, polluting buses. I'd like to see us really address these issues. They bother me more than perhaps they bother most of the people in this room, because I live downtown. I live here. I walk to the library. I really feel like it's a dangerous thing to walk to the library when all the people and all the ships are in town. So I have a lot more. You've heard this from me before, but one last point. I think we need to do a very thoughtful economic. There needs to be, and it needs to be an impartial economic study by an outside entity, because we don't really know. We don't know what we
Ms.
get. from the
McCarthy,
cruise ship
I'm
industry.
going to stop. you,
And
Ms.
it's just
McCarthy.
too vague and too,
Any questions for Ms. McCarthy?
hello? I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you for
testimony.
giving me the opportunity, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Next, we have Ms. Schroeder, sorry. Apologize for that. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Elaine Schroeder. I live at 1706 Willow Drive in the Highlands area of downtown. Today, I'm testifying regarding limiting the number of cruise ships to well below 4. I've lived in Juneau for over 40 years and have seen the growth of the tourism industry, the industrial tourism industry. I was recently talking to a friend who was employed for many years as a Juneau tour guide on the trails and elsewhere. She noted that on days when there were fewer ships in town, her clients were relaxed and happy. There wasn't a long line at the bathroom. You know, they just seemed to really enjoy their experience quite a bit more than her clients did when they were in town, when there were many more cruise ships in town. So then what about us? We who are living in Juneau, the daily stress of overcapacity, industrial level tourism in Juneau significantly decreases our quality of life. I urge you to heed the obvious. Our lovely, precious town is well over cruise ship capacity. Greed and poor planning should not overwhelm the common good. So guys, thank you for all you're doing with the by evaluating the impacts of the cruise ship industry. And please take into account those of us who live here in Juneau. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Schroeder, sorry. Thank you for your testimony. All right, that's the last I see on this resolution, unless I've missed somebody that signed up. Seeing none, we. Okay, why don't you come up? And I believe it was Mr. Kroll. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record again, and you have 3 minutes.
My name's Steve Kroll. I live 875 Basin Road downtown. I want to support 4 boats rather than 5. Let me give you a thought experiment for a moment. Let's say that the Mendenhall River was navigable and we could turn the lake in front of the glacier into a cruise port. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have 4 boats there every day, maybe 5 or 6? It really wouldn't work for a lot of people. What we've done with the downtown is we have a very small area. We've managed over time to make it palatable by excluding everybody who doesn't live downtown. Nobody who doesn't live downtown will admit to going downtown in the summer. And most people have abandoned going downtown in the winter. It's a place people don't go because it's really not habitable for somebody who's got a life to live here. Further, it's just not safe. Using the sidewalks that we have, the roads that we have is dangerous. I've been pushed into the street by groups of little old ladies in the summer with my back to traffic because the choice was either to push them because they were going to walk into me or get out of their way. When I realized the danger I was putting myself into by getting into the street, I now simply stop on the sidewalk and immobile because that's the only way I can protect them and me from the traffic and the congestion on the sidewalks. We're at the point where I look at every tourist who wants to speak to me and have to make an individual assessment about whether I really want to talk to them at that moment on any given day, because I have too many people who want to ask me where to eat, where they are, where to go. I walk downtown every day. It's not my job. It's somebody else's job to deal with that. But in fact, what we've done is we've got too many people in too small an area. The downtown hasn't gotten any bigger. The sidewalks aren't bigger. The roads aren't bigger. We're at the point where capacity really is the issue. When tourism started, I thought it was a wonderful thing. It's not wonderful anymore. We have another logical break point right now. Stop at 4. If we actually deal with our problems, we can then figure out how to go from there, if that ever became appropriate. But right now, if we look at global warming and other economic issues, a lot of capitalism is a death cult. Tourism is a death cult. We don't need to do that. We have choices. There is not a market here, though, because there is no competition to tourism. The only way that capitalism is safe is when there are markets. And the only market we have here is your ability to make sane decisions, to make tourism safe for everyone, for the tourists, for the people who live here, and to manage it appropriately. If we don't manage tourism, if you don't manage, there is nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Kroll? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, sorry, Mr.
I think I signed it. There may be any other. I signed up for the call.
Okay.
Okay.
Next we have Mr. James signed up. And we'll get to you right after him and see if we can figure it out. Mr. James, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm Bob Janes, 4478 Mountainside Drive, Juneau. I have been following the work of the Tourism Advisory Committee for several years until they disbanded. And I'm going to refute the fact that they were industry weighted. I think that committee did a wonderful job, a very difficult job of coming up with the some of the recommendations they came up with. And although I personally believe that 5 ships is tolerable. I know there are neighbors and people downtown that may not think that, but I've been able with my business to raise a family here, have 2 kids that are involved in the business. My son is the general manager now. They're out preparing to buy homes in Juneau, and they've decided to land in Juneau. And without tourism in my life and many, many other folks' lives in this room, that opportunity would not have presented itself. So yes, we do have issues. We do have congestion, and we do have management problems, but we can do it. We are doing it. And the Forest Service is attempting to do it. So I believe that the recommendations of the committee, the Tourism Advisory Committee, are fair, they're solid, and they are something we can deal with. And your management of tourism in Juneau is much appreciated. And I think as you look at the advisory committee's recommendations, you hopefully will see that they do have some very decent recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you for my
For Mr. Dane?
testimony. Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. This is on the resolution. We also got the which one you are. Okay. Go ahead.
I apologize for the confusion.
Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Bruce Weeks-Thane. Trends. Surveys already show an increase in dissatisfaction with the number of passengers. We aren't even back to the pre-pandemic levels. Imagine the discontent that you'll be hearing in 5 years if we proceed as projected and beyond. One person mentioned the library. This summer, for the first time, I had the opportunity to be able to go to the library because my job allowed me, or not having a job allowed me. Our library downtown is a flight lounge for cruise ship employees. If I didn't get there 10:30, 11, I wasn't going to get a seat. It is filled with people with their cell phones, just being there, being able to communicate with their families back home or wherever, which is great for them. So I found I had to get there early. And then once I left for lunch, don't bother going back because there won't be a seat. Library is unusable in the summer for people who are seriously trying to use the library for research purposes. Therapeutic window. In medicine, we learned that for some medicines, there's a therapeutic window. You've got a very sick patient with a life-threatening condition. You've got a powerful med that can help them. You don't give them enough of the med, they don't get better. You've gone below the therapeutic window. Give them the right amount, they get better. They may have some side effects to the meds, but they get better. You gave them an amount that was within the therapeutic window. You give them too much med, they get worse. Maybe you give them seizures, maybe they die. You went above the therapeutic window. What do good doctors do? They aim for the therapeutic window and monitor very carefully so they can adjust if they give too much or too little. What do the bad doctors do? You know, the ones getting sued for malpractice. They don't monitor carefully. They think the more the better. They overshoot the therapeutic window. They give patients too much of an intravenous bolus of medication, shove pills down the patient's throat, so to speak. You assembly members are the doctors. You're the stewards. The community is the patient. The medicine of the tourists and cruise ships, and I use medicine in air quotes. Good doctors, good stewards, shoot for the therapeutic window and then monitor carefully and adjust. I think that's the purpose of the surveys that you've instituted, which do show a bias, but I'm grateful that we have them. The problem we have is if we overshoot the therapeutic window, we can't go back. You won't be able to reduce the number of ships, the number of passengers. You can always increase, you can't go back. There's a faction in this town pushing fast and hard. They don't want to monitor carefully, and they know you can't recalibrate downward. I'm asking you move carefully, allow time for the community to digest the changes that are happening, give them time to take surveys over the years and listen to the feedback. I'm asking you to be good doctors, the ones who move carefully and monitor closely. I'm asking you not, in a couple of clumsy moves, overshoot the therapeutic window with no chance to recalibrate. Those are the doctors that commit malpractice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And just making sure anybody else signed up or is done talking on this topic before we move on. All right, with that, we will bring it to the assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt Resolution 3011A, resolution adopting cruise ship tourism policy objectives from the Visitor Industry Task Force. And I ask for unanimous consent, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Any objections? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Objecting for the purpose of a question. And the last testifier brought up can't go back. And I just wanted to hear from the manager, maybe the city attorney, on a finality of this decision. I mean, if we say in this resolution limit to 5, I mean, a future assembly could say 4, 3. I mean, a future assembly could change that number. Is that correct?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Smith is correct. Future assembly could change this to 4, 3, or 6. For that matter. So a resolution expresses the policy intent of the city and borough. I think on the practical side, you also have to think about is there dock or lettering facilities for ships, and what the possibilities are as well. So it's a resolution adopts municipal policy and can be changed. And the available infrastructure also plays an important role in what's possible.
Any follow-up, Mr. Smith?
No, Madam Mayor, I guess just to comment on this. I'm not going to object to the resolution. The task force did a lot of work on this. I guess I do hear the concern and somewhat share it too. And just I think there probably is a right number out there. I don't know what it is, but more is not always better. But that's all I'll say. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I remove my objection.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Palmer, I have a question. I've received inquiries from members of the public about this. One thing during the process of the Visitor Industry Task Force, we heard a lot was the legality of limits and could a municipality really have a cap? And the takeaway was consistently no. The language within this resolution to limit cruise ships to 5 ships per day. Could you speak about the nuance in that or how you view that versus not being able to make a hard limit?
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. So like Mr. Watt described, this is a policy document that outlines the policy objectives for the assembly. So if the assembly were to adopt this tonight, then we would start going down the path of trying to figure out how to effectuate that limit. And if the limit is 5 or 4 or 6 or 8, whatever the number is, in this case 5, would come back to you and work with the assembly and the community to figure out options on how to do that.
Any follow-up, Ms. Hughes Candies?
I guess. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Watt, just to follow on to that, you mentioned lightering and the actual number of ports that are available or docks that are available within the community. Do you interpret this policy document, if this passes tonight, as Ms. Pierce has been working with the industry in negotiating a 5 ship per day schedule or working towards that goal to be 5 ships per day visibly from the land? That's what we see out there, are 5 ships per day. Or do you interpret this language to be 5 ships per day docked and maybe 1? Could you speak to how you interpret that?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I would interpret this as a total of 5 ships per day. I believe in the Visitor Industry Task Force report, there was discussion on what constituted a large ship. So we're talking large ships. There were also other recommendations in the Visitor Task Force report that I think go hand in hand. The desire to not have hot berthing, particularly on Tuesdays. We have 2 large ships that share a private dock on the rock dump. As Mr. Palmer noted, if the assembly passes this, we would try to implement it. We've been in discussions with private dock owners and the cruise ship industry about how to do that. And it is generally a slow conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies, Ms. Hale, and then Ms.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to object just for purposes of a statement. I really appreciate the testimony that we've heard tonight, and I appreciate all of the letters. I appreciate many people who are asking for a 4 cruise ship limit instead of the 5 cruise ship limit. I used to live downtown for many years, and so I understand. I would say that we are doing something. We are actually saying yes to those 5 recommendations from the Visitor Industry Task Force, and we're asking our administration to actually implement those. So I believe the Assembly is taking a big step forward in actually taking a formal action. And I do appreciate everybody who has brought information to us, and we are doing our very best to be responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've said this before, and I just at our retreat, so I just want to say it again where there's a broader audience. The language in here, that even the word limit makes me really uncomfortable, because we spent the whole Visitor Industry Task Force process learning about the many different reasons why we cannot regulate either the number of the ships or the number of passengers. We just simply don't have control over that, and it's not constitutional. And the Coast Guard gets to control what happens on the water. So I think that 5 is a good goal, because we discussed through that process negotiating, and I think it's an achievable number through negotiation. But when we put the word limit in there, I think it broadcasts to the public that we're able to choose any number that we want to, and that we could pick 4, that we could pick 3, or that we could pick anything. And that's not the case. And I don't love the way this is written, and I'm not going to object to it, because I think fundamentally it's overall good, but I don't like the way that we've framed this discussion in talking about a limit on the number of ships, because that's just something that's not within our control.
Thank you, Ms. Treem, Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll piggyback on what Ms. Treem just said. If I were king or queen, I would do a lot of things that I don't have the power to do as an assembly member. And we did receive a lot of emails about limited to 3 or 4. We could try, we would be in litigation immediately. It would take years, would cost a lot of money. When we were in litigation over spending of the passenger fee, even though that affected a lot of communities in Southeast Alaska and indeed the state of Alaska, nobody came to our assistance. We were on our own and spending our own money and in litigation for a long time. So I think we could try, even though Ms. Treem, anyway, we could try, and the lawyers will always want to keep all of our options open and say, sure, give it a go, and we can make a case. So instead, we're going down the let's negotiate and get the industry to agree. So that's the reason I'm supporting these recommendations, not because if I could do something else, I would. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't want to be the only assembly member left out of commenting on this, because I wanted to, as I listened to everybody, and the statements that were made tonight. I was a member of the Visitor Industry Task Force, and I want to remind everybody that the recommendations that we came to were kind of like the compromise in the agreement. It wasn't the high end. It wasn't the top. I've always viewed cruise ships as big giant dump trucks that back up to the city and dump cash into our front yard. And so I appreciate, as we sit through the budget cycle and we pay for things like the downtown pool that we can continue to renovate, and we had another request for taking over cemeteries, and think of every single one of those people that get off the ship. They allow this assembly to be able to pay for those things. And so I'm a very strong advocate, and you guys probably, as we heard a comment that it was heavily weighted, this is probably because I was sitting on it and I heavily weigh on that side. I get it. But I viewed these, and the reason why I'm agreeing to them is because it was a good that took people's businesses into account, the livelihoods. My job that I started with before I was able to go into being a business owner, I was a business owner for 20 years downtown. I know full well how important those cruise ship passengers are to the businesses that keep the sales tax flowing, the property tax flowing. So to disregard the cruise industry as just a burden on Juneau is a fallacy. That is incorrect. Pays 25% of our bills, so it allows for the assembly to pay for things that we would not normally be able to pay for, and it certainly employs a whole heck of a lot of the citizens in this community. And I've got businesses that aren't directly connected to it, but I absolutely feel the importance of tourism in my two non-tourism businesses that I operate. I think the most thing, thank you for the time, Madam Mayor, this was the compromise. Some of you want less. Some of us want more. We came to a good compromise that took all of the considerations, like the 15 reasons why you can't put a hard cap limit on it. So thank you for everybody that participated in the Visitor Industry Task Force. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is the best crowd we've had in years. So that's my time, Madam Mayor.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Next, we'll go to Wahalgadock and then Ms. Hughes Candies.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Now, I couldn't be the only one to not speak on this issue, Mr. Bryson. But I appreciate what my fellow assembly members and everyone who has provided testimony and the many, many emails that we've received on this. I appreciate how Ms. Gladaszewski and everyone has framed that we as the assembly have a negotiation authority to be able to enter into good faith with the cruise ship industry over 5 ships if we so pass tonight, this resolution. I wish we had the authority to say we want a hard cap on 5 and that's it, and that's what we have the authority to do. But legally, it's not within our right to say only 5 or only 4 or only 6. I appreciate all of the thought that went into how many folks care about this community. All of you showed and demonstrated the level of care that you have for this place through your testimony and through the ability to say that, yes, this is a place that we love and we care about, and we want to protect it, both the environment and the quality of life of the people here. I wasn't around when the cruise ship, or I wasn't on the assembly when the cruise ship folks were having this negotiation and discussing, or the tourism folks were having this discussion, but I appreciate how much work has gone into it. Just in reading all of the documents that support the resolution that is before us today, there is a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of conversations and a lot of public testimony that went into what resolution 3011 ended up being. It's not entirely what I would have selected, and maybe if I had been on the assembly at the time, maybe I would have had a different weigh into the process and been able to sit on such a task force. But I'm grateful for the work that was done, and I won't be objecting to this tonight. I think that there's room for conversation, and there's room to continue the conversation and see what happens moving forward. But appreciate everything that has been said and everybody who has showed up this evening.
Thank you, Wahalgadock. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. since I just asked questions, now I will be, I don't want to be left out from speaking on this. And it would feel disrespectful to do so with so much thoughtful testimony. And as others have noted, we received a tremendous amount of testimony in our email inboxes as well. I want to recognize, I asked the questions about the limitation language, and maybe that's more an issue in this resolution of wording. I want to recognize that, like Ms. Stream said, when we put a number in there, it does really open it up for if 5 is our policy goal today, then why not 4.2 if that is what was reflected in a survey taken recently? Why not 7 with some future assembly of tomorrow? I think the reason that I don't expect I will object to this resolution tonight is because this is a snapshot in time of this current assembly's policy goals. And I view this resolution as a starting point following the work of the Visitor Industry Task Force. A lot of work was done then, and it was done by an advisory committee. And I would not say that necessarily the people on the committee put in a whole lot of work and effort. And I'm sure different members of the community would have different feelings about what the perfect makeup of that committee would be. But I brought up that why is 5 the number when Ms. Pierce first brought this memo to us, and I brought it up at the retreat. And that is because it's not to say that we can't. We're saying now that kind of our hands are tied. We can't. If we could wave a magic wand, maybe we'd do less, but our hands are tied. And truly it's not. This is a capturing of our intent. But if this is capturing our intent, I'm okay with starting here, because truly after all that work, we really didn't get to start. We got our hands full with the pandemic, and we didn't put that effort into managing with a tourism manager and with a community that is clearly saying you need to manage more. So that is how I view this tonight. So I agree the therapeutic window is a good analogy for this. I think future surveys and future testimony will need to be watched carefully. And I think we are all taking that in tonight, that further work on this issue and further management is desired by the community. And we have a ways to go from here, but I view this as a starting point.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candy. And now it's my turn. I'd be very patient, listen to everybody. But most of what I think has already been said. And I'll go tag on to Ms. Hughes Candy's. This resolution 3011, I don't know if it's a starting point, but it's going to be a living document that changes with time. The Visitor Industry Task Force, I want to say thank you to them. They did a lot of work, and thank you to Ms. Stream, and thank you for everybody being here tonight, although I know you're also here for another item on the agenda. But we had lots of emails, and you know, some people will say it's not a big enough step. I would say at least a step. We're going to be the first assembly that has actually tried to tackle some of these issues. So give us some time to ease into it. We're going to try the negotiation first, and hopefully we can negotiation with the cruise line after we've already seen what litigation does for us. So we're trying a little different tack, but keep in mind that all of us see the charts, and 1.67 is scary to everybody. Having that many tourists in town. And it's even a little scary to the tourism industry. They do well because we get highly rated. Juneau gets very highly rated as a port. If visitors have a very poor experience, which we're going to have if we have way over capacity, then we won't get rated as well, and the ships will get less and less people in them. So just like everybody says, this is a document that can change with time. We may have to change our policies with time. We have 2 docks, and if we can't work out scheduling in the next few years, I see that we're going to use our docks to relieve some of the tension. That if we're having too many, we may close our docks earlier in the fall or something like that. So we are aware. Thanks again for people coming tonight and thanks for all the emails. With that, we will go to a vote, but I don't think we had any objections. So no objection at this time. All right, resolution 311 passes then. And reminding everybody that the next ordinance we pulled from the agenda, so we won't be talking about that. Before we get on to item 13, let's take a 10-minute break. You're just excited about all these people in chambers. Okay, we will move on to item 13, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-48, version B. An ordinance related to City and Borough of Juneau Land Management Plan duration, restrictions, and authority.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance amends the governing codes related to the CBJ Land Management Plan. Section 2 of this ordinance would extend the viability of a land management disposal determination from 2 years to 10 years, which can remove unnecessary burdens in the land disposal process. Section 3 of this ordinance would amend the general powers of the Docks and Harbors Board to be consistent with the land management provisions of Title 53. Section 4 of this ordinance would remove the requirement for Docks and Harbors to have its own land management plan and would amend the code to clarify what Docks and Harbors should consider when it develops land disposal and land use policies. If this ordinance is adopted, staff will review the 2016 Land Management Plan to see if any amendments are necessary, especially relating to Docks and Harbors managed property. Assembly Lands Housing Economic Development Committee reviewed this ordinance on September 26, 2022. Assembly Committee of the Whole reviewed and amended this ordinance on December 19, 2022, which is reflected in version B. Docks and Harbors Board or Committee reviewed this topic on July 20, July 28, August September 21, and September 29 of 2022. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And for some reason, there's no public testimony on this one. So we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022-048 or 48B, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance is adopted. Item 14, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large A, large E. An ordinance appropriating $300,000 to the manager for the downtown subport planning capital improvement project. Funding provided by port development fees.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $300,000 for port development fees for cruise ship dock planning at the downtown subport. Coordinated waterfront planning effort led by CBJ ensures the entities involved do so collaboratively and with community mindfulness and allows CBJ to weigh competing interest in Juneau's port. Committee of the Whole reviewed this request at the December 19, 2022 meeting. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. With that, we will go to public testimony and we will start with Ms. Hart on Zoom. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carla Hart. I live on the Back Loop Road still, and I am asking to have the Assembly officially and on the record clarify that in adopting this appropriation that you are not committing to a 5th cruise ship dock for Juneau, that you're participating in the planning, but that it is not a commitment to further a 5th cruise dock. And also to ask that the planning and review include looking at the health impacts to Juneau residents of the cruise industry. As I pointed out in my prior testimony, you're putting potentially putting another dock with more risks even closer to more of the community. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. You still have 2 minutes. That was an inadvertent bell.
You know what? Those are my 2 points now. Just please be clear that you're not committing to the NCL dock because we still haven't had that public process. And look at the health impacts of Juneau, of decisions being made down there.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hart. Any questions for Ms. Hart? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony on that. Next, we have Jason Davis on Zoom.
Madam Mayor, I don't know if Madam Clerk is able to see the attendee list anymore, but I have nothing unless someone raises their hand on
No
Zoom.
one on phone. And I have to agree with Deputy Clerk Cathcart that we do not have anyone with that name and there are no phone numbers on Zoom. So
All right,
I would
maybe
say
he'll tune in a
on
minute.
to the next.
So then let's go to Mr. Spratt.
Madam Mayor, if I may, Madam Clerk, my question is actually, are you able to see attendees? Because it's a completely blank screen back here for me. Thank you.
I will take over the controls. Thank you, Deputy Clerk.
Mr. Spratt, hopefully everything's working. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record again, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you. My name is Aaron Spratt. I live in the Valley. I have to raise my objection to this. I'm quite uncomfortable with the city manager's recommendation. To be honest, if I'm being objective, it seems that the city is just angry that Norwegian Cruise Lines are developing this property. And again, it seems like a gross overreach of the city manager. And I would just commend the mayor to be mindful and evaluative of the actions of your city manager in regards to things like this. We have a private company trying to develop a land that they purchased, and the city being involved or unduly involved as it appears through the city manager. And I would just commend the mayor to look at your city manager. This is your employee, and to act accordingly if they are acting inappropriately. So again, I would just recommend that the city stay out of this, and please, Mayor Weldon, keep an eye on the city manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spratt. Any questions for Mr. Spratt? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Mr. Blasco.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Davis has appeared in Zoom for the next time.
Okay, we will go to him next, but we just already called Mr. Blasco up. So please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John Blasco, live in the Valley. And tonight, I'm representing the Greater Juneau Chamber of Commerce as the president. Your local chamber represents 280 businesses conducting business in the Juneau area. And I'm speaking tonight to affirm the chamber's opposition to this ordinance, as we stated in our letter that we sent to you on Friday. The city has an extensive planning and permitting process already in place. A project of this size and scope will be the subject of this process, just like the other docks that are in the port. Any issues of concern regarding the development will be addressed through this process. CBJ doing its own partial study of the port is duplicative to what the private developer is already doing. The Coast Guard is involved in this process and is responsible for reviewing the dock's design and operations that will be taking place. The timely completion of this project will lead to the achieving of many goals identified in the Visitor Industry Task Force, which you just unanimously adopted. These goals can be achieved through the title and lease processes. Holding up this development may further delay the benefits to the community of the task force recommendations. We believe that collaborative dialogue between the city and the private developer is integral to this process, and that the city going out ahead in prematurely spending $300,000 on their own study is duplicative, and we prefer that you focus on working with the private developer. So we respect the desire to have a downtown port that flows cohesively, and we believe that will happen through the process and agreements that are put in place through the normal planning and permitting process.
Thank you, Mr. Blasco. Any questions for Mr. Blasco? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Now we'll go to Jason Davis. Mr. Davis, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
This is Jason Davis, and I'm speaking from Lock Landing. I'm a principal of Turnigan Marine Construction, and I'd like to just say that the RFP, as it is posted, is titled Juneau Port Master Planning. And this RFP is not really a master planning document. It's promoting to use public funding into overreach into private development. It's very redundant with the private responsibility that these developers already own. Huna Totem has engaged with a professional engineering firm to complete the items A through D under 1.4.1 of the RFP already. My firm is performing a wind, wave, and current analysis, as well as a mooring analysis, which is a step further than that RFP scope item. We're being paid considerably more than $300,000 for that activity, and we're including it in our structural analysis and the rest of the project planning. Item B of item 1.4.1 is the safety evaluation for suitability. And that is a Coast Guard responsibility. Regardless of if this RFP moves forward, the Coast Guard is going to perform that as part of the environmental permitting process. And before the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will issue a 404 permit, they will seek concurrence from the Coast Guard. I think that items 1.41 A through D and 1.42 A and B are the responsibility of the landowners, and that spending well in excess of $300,000 to do a partial study of these items is not going to benefit the city in the master planning effort. If this RFP were to be revised to include the other items, the shore power for all of the downtown docks, and if CBJ wants to pursue an engineering contract for their small cruise ship project and the steam dock electrification, that seems well intended and well within the scope of what would normally be appropriate. But I'd like to just again reiterate that spending public money to duplicate a study that's already being done by the developers using professional engineers that are qualified to do the work seems like an overreach, and it seems that it will be of very little value to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Davis? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Mr. Abel.
Thank you for that.
Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, got it. Go green. My name is Bruce Abel. I live on Sunny Point. As Mr. Davis just said, there is a lot in this particular proposal that is redundant. You're spending public money to basically redo work that's already being done and doesn't need to be paid for with public funds. I've got really three concerns, and it's hard to boil it down. One of my concerns is that this study delays the ability to move forward for the private developer. Doing that delays jobs, and it also threatens the Coast Guard's effort to put an icebreaker here. We're talking about, in the next 3 years, potential of putting somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million in infrastructure into our community. This is something that's unprecedented. We don't have this opportunity coming along, and we should be running towards this, not away from it. This body, this community wants things like a new city hall. It wants to have an art complex, and you need to develop the tax base in order to do that. In order to do that, you have to have a growing community with new jobs. And you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 new jobs, new families moving to Juneau. That impacts our schools. We're talking about closing schools. Well, here's children that may prevent that. That keeps teachers employed. It puts people into my businesses and other people's businesses. And to delay that process with no clear purpose is of great concern. Another concern is that, quote, the purpose is stated to expand economic opportunities while balancing local priorities. Well, who determines who is the unelected individual in the city that determines what the local priorities are? One of the things that I see in this particular document is that this assembly appears to be advocating their responsibility for oversight. It may just be the way the document, the RFP is written, but it's of great concern to me. There's got to be a check and balance. There has to be a clear purpose. There needs to be input back from the city. That does not appear to be there as far as I'm reading the language. Also, there's a cooling effect on, by delaying these things, there becomes a cooling effect on investment in the community. You're talking about real money and real dollars that are appropriated, then we're kicking the can, and that's not really a good thing to do. You know, the last thing I would say is that we're throwing around money, $300,000 here like it's pocket change. We just had the city hall voted down, and I think the public is trying to telegraph that they're tired of what appears to be an assembly untethered from a budget. I don't mean that as an insult to anyone. It's just the optics of the situation. So I strongly encourage you to vote against this.
Thank you. Any questions from Mr. Abel? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Ms. Kosalukin. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Carla Kasalukin. My Tlingit name is Katkun. I was born and raised in Juneau. I attended K through 12 here in the Juneau School District, and I've raised my family here. I'm here to personally express my support for the Huna Totem development of Auk Landing, of which this ordinance and the aforementioned $300,000 study directly affects. I'm also here to personally convey my disappointment in certain members of our assembly and or our city employees, our key leadership positions here, who have either been critical of this development or wishy-washy or hyper-vigilant in imposing personal beliefs and agendas on the efforts of Huna Totem in the development of this project. Throughout my lifetime and that of my parents' and grandparents' time, I have witnessed many non-Indigenous people commercialize and profit from Tlingit culture, as well as Tlingit Ani, including what is now Juneau proper. So today I find myself wondering, when the other private docks in Juneau, the AJ and especially the Princess cruise ship docks, were being proposed for development, was the city as hypervigilant in their demands on the private individuals and the corporations at that time that were proposing to build those docks? Would the record show the same level of scrutiny the CBJ has placed on Huna Totem? If not, why is there such a disparity in the treatment given to those projects and this project that Huna Totem is proposing? Through 100% private investment, this development stands to further enhance the beauty of the downtown area, but will also serve to complement the efforts of the Sialaska Heritage Institute to re-indigenize the true aesthetic of the Juneau area. It will provide a much needed boost to the revenues generated here, which will benefit all of Juneau, not just from the cruise ship aspect, but the commercial and public spaces, which will be utilized in many different ways by the locals. This project, from the groundbreaking to the ribbon cutting and the many years to come, will provide much needed jobs to our local community. While Huna Totem represents the Huna Tlingit, make no mistake, a very high percentage of those Huna Tlingit are in fact full-time year-round residents of the city and borough of Juneau. And while there remain a great number of Huna Totem shareholders who reside at home in the city of Huna, even they still have a significant impact on our city as they travel very frequently to do their grocery, clothing, and home goods shopping, bringing their vehicles in for repair work, attending doctor's appointments, utilizing hotels, taxis, and eating at restaurants. I want to close with a reminder to all of you on the assembly and those of you in key CBJ management positions. Every single one of you are a representative, not just of the residents of Juneau like myself, but you are a representative of a governmental institution which has, since its inception in 1881, served to systematically oppress the Tlingit people as the rightful landowners here. From the wrongful taking of the ancestral lands of the Occoquan to the refusal to allow natives to purchase housing in the white neighborhoods during Mrs. Elizabeth Paradovich's time, to the urban renewal era with your eminent domain policies, and now to this day in 2023. Your constant adversarial stance on this project with your do it my way or else tactics are just another variation of the systemic racism perpetuated against us since the settlers first came here.
Wrap up, please.
I'm wrapping up. Instead of putting up roadblocks and giving Hunatotum hoop after hoop to jump through while hiding behind badges and bureaucratic red tape, please extend an olive branch in the interest of helping to lift up the Indigenous population, but also all locals who stand to benefit from this project and Hunatotum's ownership and operation of Auk Landing. Gunashish.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Castle-Lucan? Sorry. No, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Bill, I'll try to say it right this time, Leedy. Is he gone? And then next we have Jamie Roundtree. Okay, for the record, since nobody else could hear that, she is passing on her opportunity to speak. We'll pause for a moment.
That's okay.
Okay, next we have Mr. Wall. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Corey Wall from Douglas.
Thank you. So I'm a principal at Jensen Yorba Wall Architects. I'm working with Hunatotum on designing the Uplands project. So other people are talking about some of the impacts of this potential ordinance. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Uplands itself and also the public process that's happened so far. I think a lot of people were involved when Norwegian Cruise Lines had the property and did a number of public meetings. I think there were at least 3 large meetings that happened. And the joke about Norwegian Cruise Lines in those meetings was that they didn't know how to say no. So everything that came up, every suggestion was incorporated into their plan. And when Hunatotum took over that property, they adopted a lot. In fact, I think all of the goals that were in the Norwegian Cruise Lines development, which results in a significant asset to Juneau if it's developed as currently proposed. And so I would urge everybody to take a look at what is being proposed. Currently, Hunatotum put in for a conditional use permit for the Uplands project. So everything is public record, the renderings, the drawings, narratives about the project. So everything that I'm saying here is on the record. It's being already submitted to the city for approval. I think as everybody knows, there's no surface parking on this lot, different from every other cruise ship development, every development in town, every development, as far as I know, in the state. The bus parking and the vehicle parking, which is significant, 100 cars, 20 buses hidden underneath a park, a significantly landscaped park, an open park for public use facing west and south over the water with large scale landscaping and art and areas for public events. Put a food truck up on it. You can have public events happening with significant areas for AV, and so all sorts of events, music, dancing, all sorts of things can happen in this park, open to the public. And then there's a tremendous amount of retail around, hiding the infrastructure, the cruise ship infrastructure that we don't want to look at. Opportunities on the Seawalk that fronts this property on the south and on the west for new restaurants on the water and outdoor seating on the water. New economic development areas for people in town to have new businesses happen here. And then, of course, there's all of the art that's being proposed. I think as some other people are going to speak of tonight, the whole site is being visualized as a way to communicate the Occoquan area and native values and art. So there's just a tremendous project for town if this gets approved, all funded by the dock. It's just a tremendous opportunity. And again, I would just suggest that the past precedent has been to say yes to everything that has been suggested from the city. And I think we should continue to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Wall? Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Wall, thank you for coming and testifying tonight. I'm going to assume for a moment that you read the RFP for the Juneau Port Master Planning. Knowing that you've been involved from the design from the beginning, how much of the information that the city's looking for from this RFP, how much of that information is already going to be gained from the efforts of I'm sure you have to do engineering design of your own in order to design something like this. How much of this information is already available to Hoonah Totem, or has already been, or at some point will need to be gathered by the Hoonah Totem organization to have it? How much new information could come from this RFP? Could you maybe separate those out a little bit?
Yeah, so thank you. So I think Mr. Davis's testimony was particularly valuable on this. Our design is the upland, so it's contained within the property. Mr. Davis is designing the dock and any of the marine infrastructure. So a lot of what's in the RFP is going to be studying impacts to the docks. And so his testimony about all those technical issues which need to be resolved in order to build the dock are already going to be studied. And a lot of the liaison that has to happen with the city is happening as part of his work. I will say that for the uplands development, we have to, as part of the conditional use permit application, which is again already submitted to CBJ, to the CDD, we have to do traffic studies. So we have to look at all of the impacts for all of those coaches that I'm talking about and all of the tourists coming off the dock into this location and how they're going to disperse off the site. And initial studies have already been done as part of the Norwegian Cruise Line effort. So there's a lot of information that's already been compiled that's already pretty favorable about having the dock in this location, which of course you can imagine because people are not going through the narrow downtown like we've been talking about, but are feeding into Egan. So a lot of this work has been done. A lot more, is going to be presented, particularly on the marine side as that moves forward. That's a process that's happening for the Tidelands lease application that's going to be coming. That's a little bit separate from the conditional use permit for the Uplands project.
Thank you, Mr. Wall.
We need a follow-up. Any other questions for Mr. Wall? Thank you for your testimony tonight.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Parody. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Fred Parody, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Hoonah Totem, and I live on the back loop. With genuine appreciation and respect for your public service on this body, I want to begin with the end in mind, and that is that Hoonah Totem is eager to work cooperatively with CBJ and our community to permit and build the dock at Ock Landing. We are a local, native, participatory entity. Our team won international recognition for Icy Strait Point as Port of the Year, beating out Dover, England, and St. Petersburg, Russia. Our two docks are less than 40 miles from where we sit right now. We are bringing forward a straightforward project on land we own with the necessary funding and a team with demonstrated ability to successfully complete the project on time. We meet key visitor industry task force goals. We comply with applicable ordinances. We need no variances from parking or setbacks or height restrictions. This resolution began with the city manager's memo of December 15th, heard in committee of the whole here on December 19th for the purpose of planning the optimal location of a cruise ship dock at the subport. The RFP before you goes well beyond the initial recommendation and has not been subject to critical scrutiny. Its first airing was at Docks and Harbors last Thursday night. It mixes up issues germane to the Hoonah Totem dock with much broader port planning issues such as CBJ wishes to deconflict anticipated
public concerns for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to, I'm quoting from the RFP. The scope of services is anticipated will include but not be limited to the following milestones deliverables. The intent of the project is to advance the holistic benefits to individual partners through an area-wide port planning approach. The following task elements should not be considered as a limitation to the goals currently defined by CBJ. For one example, electrification is a task element. Electrification reaches to AEL&P's capacity, which is governed by their rate structure, the rules regarding prudent investment, and the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. It represents paralysis by analysis. Previously, in this assembly retreat on December 11th, the minutes noted that CBJ should explore dock acquisition friendly or adversarially. Adversarial is not in keeping with partnership. Moving forward multiple memos and proposals without allowing public comment in a meaningful and timely manner is not partnership. Uncertainty is the enemy of investment. This RFP creates unnecessary uncertainty with a deliverable that's 9 months away. That timeline's unrealistic given its open-ended scope and precludes the planned May 25 opening of the dock at Hawk Landing. We would welcome referral of the RFP to the Committee of the Whole and the chance to work on a phased approach in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mr. Richardson. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of Assembly. My name is Ricky Richardson and I live at 2951 Simpson Avenue on Douglas Island. So on January 12th, Carl Yucatel came with this RFP proposal to our office. And Carl stated to us at the end of the meeting that we needed to learn that development in Juneau was a blood sport. And I'm here to tell you that that doesn't need to be. Huna Totem Corporation has built 2 docks. And as Fred mentioned in his earlier testimony, we won Port of the Year. We also won in 2022, number 11 on the 52 places in the world to visit by the New York Times. We didn't get there by looking at buses through town and setting limits. We got there by being innovative. We proposed a gondola system that allowed us to remove nearly 100 buses through our operation and remove those buses from our downtown area. So I'm here to tell you tonight that Huna Totem has over 120 years of a development experience sitting here in Juneau, ready to help and to participate with the city to come up with innovative solutions that create the right kind of progress. This also includes with the Visitor Industry Task Force. While we didn't testify here today about the Visitor Industry Task Force, I applaud you for moving that forward, because what we can do together, as you mentioned, cannot be done through litigation. It's done through partnership and meaningful partnership, using the experience that we have and also the leverage that we have within the industry to help communicate the goals in the community that we not only are looking to develop in, but over 1/3 of our shareholders live in, and we also live here in Juneau as well. To the Visitor Industry Task Force, 5 recommendations. We have gone above and beyond in the subport development. As Corey mentioned, the Seawalk extension, we identified a plan. We didn't go with the minimums. We went as far as we could and to expand the Seawalk areas on on the subport lot. We also want to ease congestion by turning left. We can then remove congestion downtown. It's a misconception that the Huna Totem dock will increase the number of ships. We are here to tell you that we support your 5-ship limit. Not only do we support your 5-ship limit, but we know by installing this dock at the subport, this also removes congestion, removes pollution, and improves the safety of the harbor. And we also know that tender guests spend less time ashore and they spend less money within our community. So by having this dock, we are not increasing the number of ships. We are actually improving the overall guest experience and also the visitor experience within our community. Last is the dock electrification. We are moving forward On the RFP, it listed a series of organizations that the city felt like they should manage the relationship with. So that includes with electrification. And I'm here to tell you those names on that list, A through the bottom, we are already working with. And in wrapping today, I would just tell you that this proposal started at 100,000 before the end of the meeting last time. It was 200,000. 300,000 is now the number, and that will just balloon. And instead, we should be innovative. There is enough talent in this room to come up with the right solutions. And we're here to tell you we're ready to work with the city to make this happen.
Thank you. Any questions from Mr. Richardson? Mr. Bryson and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for coming today. I wanted to ask a question about what CLIA might, how CLIA feels about your development. I have a letter here that was in my red folder that was from June 10th, 2019, prior to the pandemic, prior to NCL purchasing the piece of property for $20 million. This CLIA memo says that they support Juneau in purchasing that subport dock that afterwards we failed to purchase. It was purchased for $20 million and then you guys received it as a donation. Has CLIA indicated that they would maybe have a different letter than this now that the ownership is defined? I almost received this letter in my red folder like this was some of our evidence that CLIA wants CBJ to have authority over this dock. Now that you guys own the dock, could you maybe speak to what CLIA might think about who should develop that dock now?
You know, as I sit here before you, I can't testify on behalf of CLIA, but what I can say is that I'm sure that you will get an updated letter shortly. And the other thing I'd also like to add is that we have the best of both worlds that have happened with this piece of property. It was sold as 2.9 acres, $20 million that was given to the Mental Health Trust. What a win for the Mental Health Trust, right? Now this land has been returned to local native ownership. People that care about this community and are sitting here before you tonight to work together with you to come up with the right solutions.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Patterson, for being here. I guess I'm.
Richardson.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's all right. We're neighbors.
You spoke about collaboration, and I'm with you on that, I guess. And I'd ask the city manager later this too. Why haven't we come up with a collaborative effort to do this yet?
That's an interesting question.
It's a good question. I think there was a previous city council member meeting a couple of weeks ago when it was asked of city manager, have you asked Huna Totem how they feel about this? We had not been asked. As Jason Davis stated, there are lots of redundancies that are within this study, and the scope of this RFP is far reaching and never ending. And so I think that we have the ability to work together. We are spending an enormous amount of money to answer the questions. You don't drop $150 million of investment and not have it engineered and stamped and insured. And that's really what we're willing to provide and to work with the city. And I'll go back to the RFP, the VITF, the Visitor Industry Task Force as well. I think that we're really able to help move some of those initiatives forward. And even with the bus parking downstairs, having electrified downtown's circulator comes to our solution about how do we move traffic in the downtown, but also provide solutions for those who can't walk and expand the business area to provide adequate growth for the downtown region. So I think getting back to your question, I think that we are here to help and we are ready and eager to participate in the process.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, thank you, Mr. Richardson, for being here. And I think I'm not quite sure what you were saying or going to say about dock electrification. I know this is, as you know, this assembly is keenly interested, and there have been times, and you may not know this, but there have been times when this assembly did not necessarily agree with AEL&P. So there were some of us that were quite, there was some consternation, certainly for me, when Huna Totem was talking about, well, maybe we can't dock electrify right away. So could you speak to kind of where you're at with that, understanding that there are constraints on power, but maybe perhaps sometimes we don't all agree on those. Thank you.
Yes, and so when we were here previously, we stated that we were going to be plumb and ready, and we have moved forward with AEL&P. You know, as you know, there's a challenge with the amount of power that's available. Also, there's some challenges with just getting transformers that would be required, and that puts us right now third in line, right, to make that happen. So we're trying to work through that process, but I would also like to state that all of these are moving parts that can all move together. So we are moving to provide an electrified dock and to provide shore power, but that process can move forward while we work through this development process, the public engagement, all of that can happen together. But we also believe that there is a way for all of us to work together to come up with an innovative solution, because as you know, there is a limited amount of power here. Some summers we have enough power if we have enough water, or the rain comes and fills the reservoir and allows us to create enough power. Sometimes we don't know that in time until we get to the end of the summer season, whether that will carry us through the winter. But we do believe that there are some other opportunities there that we should be looking at. And given the opportunity, we would like to continue that dialogue with the city and with AEL&P.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. That's very, very comforting, and it's very, you know, I'd always believed that you wanted to pursue it. It's good to hear what you've got to say, and I just want to acknowledge that I know these things are, you can't just order up the transformer and it shows up on the barge, the next barge. So I appreciate the progress that you're promising.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Ms. Garza. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Jody Garza. I live in the Valley. And I'm here tonight to, first of all, I wanted to tell each of you that I appreciate the service that you do for the city and the hard decisions that you have to make. I do think that this decision tonight on this ordinance, to reject this ordinance, is one of the easier decisions that you have to make. And the reason is the plan is, while it's well intended, I believe that it's a redundant study, not a good use of public funds. We have systems in place, permitting process, newly established tourism director, visitor industry task force studies and surveys of the public. I think that this plan could hinder the Huna Totem project of the dock installation. And one other comment that I have is that while the passenger numbers have increased, and we're looking at approximately 1.67 million passengers this year, there is a longer season. So it's not that they're all on, here during, May to September. The season goes now from April till October. And so I think that should be something that's considered. It's a longer season, and I'll yield my time.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Garza? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mr. Coogan.
Wayne Coogan, Ock Bay. First of all, I want to say I love my city manager. I've been working with him for 25 years, I believe. Maybe I think while he was manager, I did something like $150 million worth of work for him. And over the years, I can say this, we don't always agree on everything. He has different views, but I have to say, I will attest to his integrity without reservation. All right. So I need to say that our economy here, our local economy here, is struggling. I think I don't need to explain that to everybody. I think most people understand that. You know, we had a lecture recently. We learned from the MLS service that the average single family home in Juneau in 2018 was traded for $360,000. In 2022, that same home was trading for $550,000. All right. That's a serious problem. COVID aside, that's still a big problem. Now, you know, the cost of living is beyond the reach of many of us. Those who are struggling, trying to build a life here. Most of us are beyond that phase, but we cannot slam the door on those people. You know, there's an exodus of young people. Everybody's heard of young people that have to leave Juneau to go somewhere to find work or to find affordable lifestyles, right? So, you know, and we're also facing the closure of schools here. So what's the remedy? What's the remedy? The remedy is one key solution would be to support critical infrastructure and economic initiatives. All right. What's currently proposed on the waterfront downtown are significant initiatives, and they're bold initiatives. They include the Norwegian and Huna Totem initiative and the Coast Guard initiative. So I think we can ill afford to do anything that would undermine those things. And you would ask, I'm running out of time, but you ask, how could that help? How could more people come to Juneau with more demand help prices? Well, there's a counterintuitive answer. That is, it's not about supply and demand. It's in a small economy like this, it's about economy of scale. If people who supply products can find a larger market, they can justify it better. I could go on and on. I ask that you suspend your action tonight. And if you can't simply suspend it totally, I ask you to delay it for further consideration so that I might have time to work this out with my lovable manager. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Coogan? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mr. Hannah. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. I've known him since he had a ponytail. So I'm here to talk about this, of course, and I have some concerns. I know the manager, our tourism director have some concerns, and they feel they're very valid. I have a couple concerns of my own. I actually am concerned about the waterfront and public space and green space. I think this is something we seriously need to consider, but we also do have lots of opportunity on public land to address those. I don't think we need to be meddling on private property. My fear, my concern is that we're trading some small risks, known risks for some large unknown risks. I mean, the fact is we have little or no ability to regulate what the Coast Guard does. Federal agencies on federal property, they don't need any permits from us. They'll go ahead. So we need to do our best with work with them. Otherwise, we're sending a bad message and we're jeopardizing what they may want to do. Now with Huna Totem, we know that they already have to go through the conditional use permit. They're already doing all the work we need done. If we try and delay that, that's a disincentive for investment. And that's not a good thing, because as Mr. Coogan stated, we have some real big problems in this town, and two of them are an aging population and affordable housing. And the Coast Guard has already said that they'll bring money for housing. We know they'll bring lots of young people, some of them with families, children for our schools. They've said they'll put money towards childcare, which is a real big problem in this town. Everywhere it's a problem. We know the visitor industry provides a lot of jobs for young people. We actually have young people come to this town to work in the visitor industry, and they decide to stay because Juneau is a beautiful place to live. I just think that we have to do our best to advance these projects. Like Mr. Coogan said, we don't want to risk stifling them. We don't want to risk delaying them. I think we just need to work with them, and I think we can do it in a collegial manner, and everybody will get along. And you know, in closing, it's somewhat ironic that before the start of every one of these meetings, we read the land acknowledgement being on Tlingit land, but now here we are telling them what they cannot do with their land. So I'm asking you to please vote no on this RFP. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hannah? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next we have Mr. Callaway. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name's Roger Callaway. I live at 10825 Glacier Highway. I'm here to speak against this ordinance. While it sounds tame, this ordinance has been, the RFP that has been written to support this ordinance is anything but. It's wasteful. As you've heard tonight, probably severely underfunded and probably will take twice as long. I know we have a waterfront plan. Shouldn't we start there? Any investment in plan development has been made under the umbrella of that present waterfront plans. The RFP will stymie any plan development and can detour or even derail plan development. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And last, I have Mr. James.
I'm getting old. I couldn't get out.
Please state your name and area.
These old parts doing here testifying.
Please state your name and area.
My name is Bob Janes, again, 4478 Mountainside Drive. In due respect to Mr. Watt and Mr. Yucatel back there in the corner holding his head, I cannot support this RFP, this $300,000. I sat on the harbor board. I know how we scrounged up for $50,000 here, $25,000 there. I know this is passenger fee money, but there are a lot of projects that deserve more attention than this. This is a moment in time that we can grasp, and I feel it. I know you guys feel it. I know it, that this is something we have to jump on. Huna Totem has a great project in mind. We've gone beyond studies. They've done the studies of their own, and we will have a lot of time to make sure that they play by the rules. So you guys, I really appreciate what you've done tonight and all the testimony you've listened to, and I hope you feel the same thing I feel, the excitement for this moment in time for Juneau's economy and our future and our ability to continue funding the things we need to fund in this beautiful neighborhood, beautiful city we live in. So thank you for your attention tonight. I'll leave it at that. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. James? Thank you for your testimony. Okay, with that, I think that is all of our public testimony. So we will bring it to the assembly, and we're actually going to jump on this one. So you're safe, Ms. Tree. Ms. Glaszewski has an amendment or two she might want to address, so we'll go to her.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move ordinance 2022-06 BAE. And I would offer some amendments.
Let's just take the amendments one at a time.
Okay, these are basically assembly intent, so not on the ordinance, but if this goes forward, I'd first say that when I first heard about this, I was against this idea. I thought it was the Huna Totem should plan their dock, and the Coast Guard should plan their dock, and having talked to more people over the last couple weeks, I do think there's a place for this. I do not want it to delay any of Huna Totem plans. So here's some possible baby splitting. So first, I would say that the assembly is not committing to a fifth dock. I would also say I would amend the area of planning from the Seadrome to AJT. So not the whole square that's in the RFP, but basically half that square. So from the AJT dock to the Seadrome, not over to the rest of the place, to make it more complicated.
Okay, stop.
The left half of the square. So
so again, it's going to be from the Seadrome dock to the AJT dock. which is the scrawny little piece.
So not the whole CBJ docs thing.
Deputy Mayor, can I ask you to refer to which page you're referring?
I'm
to?
referring to, so that one, I'm referring to page 21 of 21 for my attachment A, Juneau Harbor project area boundaries.
For the request for proposal, she's looking at the RFP.
I'm looking at the RFP. Sorry? Sure.
Or give me a moment. Yes, I shall.
And we're taking these one at a time.
We are taking these one at a time.
So it already states in there that we're not committing to a fifth dock. It's already stated in the RFP, so I don't think we need to restate that. But we're gonna go to.
I would state it because
Okay,
it's an assembly thing.
you're just staying in intent.
Mr. Palmer has his hand up and I'm doing something he's
Mr. Palmer.
freaking out about.
All good. As you read through your amendments, I'm interpreting these as whereas clauses that you want to add to the ordinance. Is
Yes,
that right?
yes, Mr. Palmer. Or however, is that the where they go?
Yeah,
So far,
Okay,
maybe point of order.
Go ahead, Ms.
If I may, this is a mixture of an ordinance and an RFP. And what we actually have before us today is an ordinance and we'll be voting on an ordinance. So it's very confusing I think if we're going to change things, we have to change the ordinance, not the RFP, if I may.
so Mr. Palmer
Yeah.
has said that it's whereas clauses in the
Ordinance.
ordinance. So far, and I think they're all like that, if you'd allow. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Dream.
Oh, that's my bedtime alarm. Could could we could I move that we postpone this so that we don't make these amendments on the fly?
Yes, you could move that. So
I
I'm looking for the attorney for that.
would
one.
respond to that if I
If
may.
we move that, so does that take precedence over everything else?
it does
I
so
thought
far.
so. That's
I'd like to respond if I could, Madam Mayor.
go ahead, Ms.
The reason I would oppose that amendment is the whole issue of this is delaying all our things. And if we do, it delays some more, it just delays it further. I'm hoping to get the cruise ship dock part of this RFP done in 3 months. And if we do another 3 weeks or whatever it is, it'll take us to do it. It's just moving everything further back. I'm trying to do a thing that does not delay review of the Huna Totem Dock. So that's why I would hope we could do it today. That's my pitch.
Ms. Dream.
Did that count as a motion? Would I just, I'll make a motion that we move this to the next committee. What, actually?
Committee of the whole is the next.
Committee of the whole.
Next committee of the whole is on the 13th through the mayor.
Okay, I move that we table this until the next committee of the whole meeting.
Standby one. Is there room on the committee of the whole?
Mayor, we would make room. We do have lots of topics that the assembly is always interested in, but we would make room.
Okay, so the motion is to table this till the committee of the whole. Any objection?
Object.
All right, you've already spoken to your objection, so we'll go to Mr. Smith and then Ms. Hale.
I think we just should try to get to certainty as soon as possible. So I'll oppose the motion.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. I'll oppose the motion as well for the same reason. I think what we've heard tonight, including from members of the Huna Totem management structure is this is going to really throw some wrinkles in there. I think we need to get to certainty tonight.
All right, anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Okay, I would also object to it because I think we need to move forward. Madam Clerk, we have a motion. And we have objection. Want to call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the motion to postpone this ordinance to the committee of the whole meeting. Ms. Treem,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
Balakina,
No.
Deputy Mayor Gladys
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
No.
Motion fails.
Okay, so the simplest way to do this is motion by motion. So Ms., since we're going to put it actually in the ordinance, Ms. Gladys, why don't you start with your first one?
Okay, I would add language, whereas the Juneau Assembly has not committed to approving a dock at the subport.
I see that.
Okay, any objection to that, adding that?
Object.
Ms. Hale and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree that the Juneau Assembly has not committed to that. But I don't think it's necessary in this ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Bryson.
Yes, I think it sends the like an equally negative message that like we're almost saying no to the dock by wording that in the ordinance. So leaving it in the, it's vague enough as it is. All right, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Hughes Candies.
I guess point of orders suggestion, had I realized this is what you intended to do with your whereases, I would have voted to move it to the cal. Should we take a ease of like 3 or 5 minutes? I'm fine with doing it tonight, but writing it out loud on the fly seems crazy to me.
Okay, well, we'll see what Ms. Gladys and the attorney can come up with.
Okay,
And
that's fair enough.
we cannot put the map on the screen. The clerk gave me a note. So let's take at least 5 minutes.
Okay.
We're just waiting for it to get to Wahalga Dock so she can see it too. So stand by for a little bit longer.
Okay, they're on their way through the cloud to you. Oh, perfect. You got them. Madam Mayor, she has them.
Okay, let's bring us back since we're losing the other end over there. Madam Clerk, we lost you.
Uh-oh. The only person that has to be here.
All right, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'm going to attempt this before we go through all these amendments. I move that the Assembly table ordinance 2022-06 BAE indefinitely, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection?
I object.
I object. All right.
So
You want to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Edwardson, back when we were first new Assembly members, said that any ordinance, any decision we had that we made had to pass the red face test. And I don't believe this one does. We are spending $300,000 of public funds. I know it's sometimes easier to spend millions of dollars that we talk about on projects, and we get into smaller dollar figures. You know, in governmental terms, $300,000 isn't a giant governmental chunk of money, but in this situation, it's unnecessary. We are wasting Juneau citizen taxpayer money on a study that the group that's actually trying to build the dock is going to be required to come up with all of that study information. The other component is with the Coast Guard. We are either creating an environment that allows the Coast Guard to come in. This study will only produce results that delay this project and could jeopardize $500 million coming into our community by doing this study. Let's let private sector pay for the study so that we're not using taxpayer money, and have the conversations with Huna Totem and with the Coast Guard, and have these groups working together to come up with a solution. The city tried to go down this path in 2019. We failed. We weren't able to buy the piece of property, so now we're not going to get to own the dock. We attempted it and we're not able to do it. Let's let private sector do what they want to do using private sector money, and not waste a single nickel of taxpayer dollars on a study where they're going to give us that information, and they're going to have to provide that information to us ahead of them building the dock. So we're going to get this study anyways. Let's let the private sector pay for it and not Juneau citizens. I urge you to table this ordinance indefinitely for the good of the future of the community. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Who wants to speak to their objection? Ms. Glaszewski.
I will, Madam Mayor, because I felt exactly the way Mr. Bryson felt until recently. And in part, because first of all, just to correct the record, it's not Juneau taxpayers' money, it's port development fees. So it's people who are vessels and entities that have paid at the port. So, but secondly, it's the last piece of our waterfront. Someone asked, why didn't we do this for the Princess Dock? That wasn't the last little bit of our waterfront. AJ or the Rock Dump dock was on the rock dump. This is the last crucial piece. And I've always said that we should make sure that whatever we do in this piece doesn't affect the rest of the pieces, that some of which CBJ would like to develop. So that's all I'd like to do, is be sure that any development, no matter where it's proposed, it is not precluding a different development. That's all. And I totally agree with you. Most of the funds should be spent by the private, whoever owns the property. So, and to me, this doesn't delay anything. In fact, there's an argument that it could enhance that. And the reason is, we are a diverse body. And when someone comes before us with a project, we don't just say, oh, great, thanks. We go, hey, you said X. And then I get up and say, excuse me, but what about Y and Z? And can you prove to me about A and B? And then they have to go back and go find A and B and Y and Z. If we have information of our own, that will help any developer get their permit, because it's not a simple thing to get approval for the last chunk of our waterfront. So I think that the city should have some planning in here. Do I feel bad that we didn't do it 2 years ago? Yes, I do. You know, should we have done it 2 years ago? Yep. Did we do it? No, we were a little bit busy with other things. So that's why I don't want this to be 9 months. I don't want this to preclude any development. And I agree that the private, whoever owns the property, should be doing most of the planning. And regarding the Coast Guard icebreaker, the gist I get about that is a lot of the Coast Guard doesn't really want the icebreaker in Juneau. So I think that the city, this is to help the icebreaker get to Juneau, not to preclude the icebreaker to get to Juneau. So that's just a sort of side note about the icebreaker. I also objected to including the icebreaker in this RFP until, again, I talked to some more people who made that point. So there's my point on that.
All right, thank you. I will Hoggadock, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Hale.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm actually going to speak in support of Mr. Bryson's motion. I don't know if you want to go to those who object first.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with where we're going with tabling this. I think that there's a lot of conversation that has yet to have been had. Sounds like with Huna Totem, especially a conversation about where this type of study could and should go, but also what they're already doing that we wouldn't have to pay for. And conversations in the project description, it sounds like to me, just through the testimony that Huna Totem has provided thus far, most of these conversations have already happened. So be curious to know how this project could pencil out, in that it's so different from what Huna Totem is already paying for, that we would need to spend the fees from Docks and Harbors in order to produce this study. I think there's a lot to consider in delays that we haven't anticipated. I appreciate where Deputy Mayor is going with her amendments, but I don't know if they're far enough to ensure that this wouldn't be delayed with the track that has been laid before us. So I will be supporting Mr. Bryson in this.
Thank you, Hoggadock. Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm in support of Mr. Bryson's motion to kill this particular ordinance, but I do want to say that I agree with what Ms. Gladczewski said about our duty and responsibility to be planning for the waterfront, and that includes the whole waterfront. And I think we saw a very clear demonstration at the beginning of this meeting with a number of people who testified on the Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations that we belong in this space. The city and borough of Juneau belongs in that space and has a duty to the residents of Juneau to be involved and representing the interests of the entire community. And that sometimes includes asking questions that people might think is us being mean, and it's not. We're doing our jobs, and we did that with NCL when they purchased the property, and I think we made it really clear at the moment that they, that they purchased that we were going to have this process, and it was, not going to be just a green light. And that is true no matter who the landowner is, that it doesn't change what our responsibility is to do that process. That said, I don't think that this particular appropriation and this particular iteration of this is the right move. I do think we need to be mindful of our partnership with Huna Totem, or a partnership with anybody that comes wanting to work with the city and borough of Juneau. I think this has kind of gotten us off on the wrong foot, and I appreciate the amendments that Ms. Gladszewski is trying to make to maybe help that a little bit, but I think it's just a better idea to scrap this particular idea and accomplish our goals of managing our waterfront, being involved and representing the interests of the entire community and what happens there. I think we have better ways to accomplish that. We can do that elsewhere besides this particular motion and this particular appropriation.
Thank you, Ms. Stream. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Stream. I think you said more eloquently than I could have a lot of what I was thinking. I feel, and yes, COVID got in the way. And I think that's part of the reason that this whole process right now is feeling so bumpy, because Norwegian was here pre-COVID, COVID happened, and then basically nothing happened. And then all of a sudden Huna Totem is on the scene, and you guys have great big plans, and it's really cool. But wait, what was the public process supposed to be? I mean, we all have been struggling to try to figure out how do all these pieces fit together? This specific ordinance and this RFP, although I know a lot of work's gone into it, feels like after a long wait, this is too rushed. We have a long-range waterfront plan. If we want to amend the long-range waterfront plan, maybe that's the vehicle to do this by. So I just feel that we're in too much of a hurry now to put this out there, and it does have some real potential for throwing some big monkey wrenches in a big project.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have some questions that I was hoping to ask the manager.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, during some testimony, and I mean, an argument against this ordinance has been that it's going to be redundant and that all this work is going to be done elsewhere. Would you speak to that?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think we're talking about two different things. So the Huna Totem, the developer of the property and proposed dock, wants to present a dock project and an uplands project to you. And that's one thing. And that's one way to go about your decision-making and getting information. What this ordinance proposes is a broader view of the entire port and a community process where you can task your staff for information. And I just think they are two entirely different things. It would be my opinion that Huna Totem could very likely be disappointed if they spent a bunch of time and money and came forward with a dock proposal. And then we looked at it and we said, how does that fit in with the Coast Guard? And you looked at me and I would say, well, I don't know. Haven't done any work on that. So I actually think doing this work increases the likelihood of success of a dock project and accelerates the schedule. That would be my opinion.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Another thing that was brought up and you touched on there was preclusion or issues in conflict with the Coast Guard dock facility. Do you think this work would harm a potential Coast Guard facility downtown?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I think a huge point would be to make sure that we are ready for a Coast Guard icebreaker. Senator Sullivan worked very hard to get the Coast Guard to select an Alaska community to host an icebreaker. And I think if we wait, I think we're going to be disappointed. If we want an icebreaker, I think we have to work very hard. I think we are going to have to push the Coast Guard to engage. I think we're going to have to put concepts in front of them. I think we're going to have to advocate very, very strongly. I think there's many options for how and where they could home port the icebreaker in Juneau. But I think if we want that to happen, we are going to have to run right towards that issue and work hard on it.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last one, I think. Are you aware of other situations or other communities where they have located a large port facility, a dock or something, and that has turned out to be problematic in terms of a longer, anyway, conflicts and elsewhere?
Mr. Manager.
I would say every Alaska cruise ship community has its issues. The current one I think that is challenging is municipality of Skagway is taking over the Broadway and Ore Terminal docks. And they have hired same contractor, good contractor who makes a really good dock product, good engineer, but that contractor proposed a plan to the municipality of Skagway to put in a new floating berth. And about a year later, and this is relatively new, the cruise lines looked at it and they said, not enough clearances. We don't think we can get our ships in there. I think the Skagway situation is more challenging. It's tighter, it's cheek by jowl than we have here. I think in fairness, the dock at the subport is less difficult to site. For me personally, I'm more concerned that we get the Coast Guard issue right in the context of cruise ship dock, and that we don't assume that a cruise ship dock is going to be okay. And later the Coast Guard says, we don't really want to bring an icebreaker in that close to a cruise ship dock. To me, that's a huge issue.
No more questions, but
one more. Okay.
no more questions. I was just a comment. You know, some of my concerns on this are redundancy, delaying the project timeline, and I'm not still convinced that this project won't. I'm curious as we work through the amendments to see if that concern is going to be alleviated. But I do think it is our responsibility to look at the overall picture, evaluate where a dock downtown leaves the most potential for other developments. I think the other parties have their focus in mind, which is what they should have. But I guess I'm not sure when Ms. Treem said that we can look at this later. I'm not sure why we'd want to wait later or when that would be. So I'm not going to be supportive of tabling this amendment or this ordinance at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I was going to wait to bring up some comments, but with this being tabled, I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts and we'll see where it goes from here. First off, I want to thank everybody for their testimony, just as I thanked folks who came in here earlier. We received a lot of testimony on this one as well. It's been thoughtful, and really appreciate you taking the time to write and to show up tonight. A couple of one-offs. We definitely want the Coast Guard here. I think that's a unanimous view of the Assembly, and we know we have economic issues. Just as throwaway thoughts. I heard Mr. Bryson quote Rob Edwardson earlier, and we were both around when we were deciding whether or not the city should bid on this piece of property. And I'm thinking of something Mr. Edwardson said as well, which is that it is our job to be concerned about the best and highest use of the city property and whether all of the interests of everybody in the city is being represented. That is going to be always sort of based in coming from a different place than a private developer. I voted against amending the waterfront plan when we amended the waterfront plan to even move forward in this process. And I said then that CBJ should be in no hurry, and our goals and interests would be different than the developer in terms of timeline. We're taking over where prior assemblies left off, and I acknowledge that Huna Totem is taking over where Norwegian Cruise Lines leaves off. I agree that Norwegian Cruise Lines in their public process made a lot of promises to a lot of people, and it's I think we all want to have a good relationship, but we are now finding our footing with different property owners and different part within the process. The city was interested in the piece of land and we didn't get it, but we will remain interested in controlling the waterfront, just as we are interested in the best and highest use of the rest of the waterfront. I will not say, I maybe will phrase it slightly different than the manager did in terms of how this, whether we do this tonight or we don't do this, how this affects the developer. But I will say that delays will happen and there will be endless hoops seemingly, because to me, it's funny, a lot of the crowd has cleared out who was here earlier. And if you weren't here earlier, it would be like we didn't have all those people very upset about the state of tourism and very concerned about whether we are having too many tourists or not. And so the tone between these two things are very different. And yet it's incumbent on us to remember all of the upset people earlier who feel like we're not doing enough, which is why this process is going to feel long and drawn out, not because anyone here wants to delay this project, but because we've got to take the consideration of all those people in mind. I haven't been a huge fan of this idea because I think if we're to be the arbiters of the public process, I don't know how we are a key piece of that process through something like this and then maintain our neutrality. And I'm still wrestling with that, but I will vote against tabling it because I'd like to give Ms. Gladaszewski a chance to move her amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. I'll get to you in a minute, Mr. Bryson, because now it's my turn to talk. So I'll object also. Ms. Hughes Candies, you were a little more eloquent than I was perhaps, but again, thank you all for coming tonight. And I also want it stated that I have met with Huna Totem several times about this, and at no time have I questioned their integrity or their creativity to for Mr. Richardson. So I think you guys are going to have a great project. I love the uplands. It's wonderful. But what we have to make a decision on is whether this dock will be in the right place for the Coast Guard and the property next door past the AJT dock. It's interesting that we're hearing things that we're trying to block the Coast Guard. Nothing can be further from the truth. We're trying to help the Coast Guard. And one of the ways we can do this is to do this study, because then Senator Sullivan can say, hey, Coast Guard, they're doing a study trying to figure things out. You need to be a player, because otherwise the federal government will just do what they want to do and the Coast Guard will just do what they want to do. So it's tough to figure out the right mechanism to make this happen. And is this perfect? No. And that's why I was looking forward to hearing Ms. Gladaszewski's amendments to try to see if it can be better compromise. But I'm certainly hopeful that we can do it in less than 9 months. I'm certainly hopeful that Huna Totem would be able to continue with their project, so there's no delay in that. They stay with their conditional use permits and all that stuff, and it can be done simultaneously. But at the end of the day, when we ask our staff, is there room for the Coast Guard? How are they going to answer that without some kind of study? Or is there room for whatever Mr. Yucatel dreams up on the other side? And again, the question will be, how do we answer that? So I'm going to object to tabling it, even though it's going to be a hard decision.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted a last moment as I made this very important motion. The city asked to do public-private partnerships often. We've heard it a few times. And if the next time, if we do this study, the next time that the city says we want to do a public-private partnership, who's going to sign up? Why would you be a partner with a city if they can kill your project with a study? I do not believe that this is in the best interest of this project. I don't think this advances the community's best interest. We have a waterfront plan. To throw a Juno Port master planning at the last minute that is vague at best. It needs more vetting. That's why we're going to try and we're trying to fix a big old pile of mess that we just don't need to do it. We do not need to spend $300,000. Now, okay, I appreciate somebody pointing out that it's marine passenger fees, but if we use $300,000 marine passenger fees on that, that'll be something else that won't receive those funds. I believe that this sends the wrong message. If we want to be a player and have public-private partnerships, we sometimes have to let the public or the private industry do their thing. Because if we want every private sector to their private industry that wants to come work with a city to behave like the public sector, to behave like government, they're not going to come and work with us. And I think that's what this study is asking Hunatoton to be, act like government, and they're not. So that's why I've asked to table this indefinitely. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. So we have a motion on the table to table this indefinitely, and we have objection, Madam Clerk.
Madam Mayor, for the motion to table ordinance 2022-06 BAE indefinitely, Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Treem,
Yes.
Walakida,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Gladchevsky,
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
No.
Motion fails 4-4.
Okay, with that, we will go to Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not going to offer amendment 1. Says that in the RFP, as you said. We don't need to beat that up. Amendment 2 is making the study area smaller, just so we don't get all mixed up in various things. I believe Mr. Yucatel put it bigger to encompass places that the electrical things could go, but I'm just trying to make it smaller so that it doesn't take as long. And so people know where that is. It's the dock, from the Seadrome to the dock that's toward Gold Creek from the Hunatoton property.
Ms. Treem, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just object to this particular amendment. I think if we are going to do some port master planning, we need to look at the whole area. And having recently been briefed on the situation in Skagway, which is just a giant mess, I don't want us to ever end up in their situation. And I think if we are going to do planning, then it needs to be for the whole downtown waterfront area. And then to one of my reasons for objecting to this whole thing is that I think it's kind of soured our relationship. And I think if we focus this on just that part, we're making that issue worse. And it does look like we're targeting this partner we're trying to work with. And so 2 reasons why I'd like to keep the study area as broad as possible.
Any further objection or? All right, I will speak in favor of it, because we're trying not to delay anything. So the smaller the area that we're looking at, I think the better chance we have of getting this done in a timely fashion. So, and it does include any motion or any concern with either side of that dock. So I would speak in favor of it. Madam Clerk, we have a motion and objection.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for amendment number 2. Whereas the area of study for this Juneau Port master planning is from the Seadrome to the old Standard Oil AJT dock. Ms. Gladysevsky.
Yes.
Wolaki Dock.
Yes.
Ms. Treem,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
and Madam Mayor.
Yes,
Motion carries.
Ms. Gladysevsky.
Amendment 3 just is to get the new cruise ship dock portion of the RFP, which is on page 9, to do those things first and to have them, whoops, I'm not pressing my button, and to have them done in 3 months. Those are technical things. They should be able to do that. Again, I'm trying, in fact, to do the opposite of delay for the Hunatotum dock, to give the manager and the port director information that to answer all the 1,000 questions that we will have. I certainly will have regarding how that all that property works together.
Any objection? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Ms. Hale.
Object for purpose of a question. I understand that 1.4.1 C talks about evaluation of dock location with deference to Coast Guard dock and Standard Oil dock. However, 1.4.2 A talks about conceptual options and shoreside requirements for a hypothetical icebreaker. So are we gonna get what we want by just doing 1.4.1?
Yeah.
Madam.
I am just saying that the 1.4.1 needs to be done in 3 months. And you'll see for Amendment 4, just to make it clear that the whole thing takes 9. So I'm not trying to take anything out of the RFP. I'm just saying be done with the first part with 1.4.1 in 3 months. I am silent on when they get to the rest of it. Other than it should be 9 months, and that would be the next amendment. Does that answer your question, Ms. Hale?
Well enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just curious if this is feasible from the CBJ side.
Mr. Manager.
Mayor, I certainly understand the intent. I can't promise consultant schedules, but we can make this the highest priority and we can displace other municipal work. And we can just move this as fast as we can. We can also work with Hunatotum and their engineer and incorporate their efforts to the best that we're able to do that.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I also wanted to see if this would work with Hunatotum's timeframe. But they do not appear to be here any longer, so.
Anybody else? I'm going to object for the purpose of the question. I think my same question is what Mrs. Hale is referring to. So 1.41 is the cruise ship dock, but 1.4.2 is the Coast Guard and 1.4.3 is the small cruise ship infrastructure on the other side. So I don't know if just the dock would satisfy this. I don't know. Go ahead, Ms. Gladysevsky.
My understanding from talking to an engineer is that these are technical things that can be done And I just want the Kuna Totem property part done first and as quickly as possible. To not delay, there's a lot of testimony about we're trying to delay or throw obstacles. And again, to me, it's the opposite. We need some information to be able to answer, to allow the city to be able to answer and have confidence that everything's in the right place along the whole length of what's left of our undeveloped waterfront.
Sorry, well,
No, sorry, the deputy mayor answered my question with her last line of thought.
all right, well, your line of thought made more sense than your actual amendment, in my opinion, but that's all right. Any objection to this? Seeing none, that amendment passes. Ms. Glaszewski.
And Amendment 4 just makes the intent of the assembly clear. It does say 9 months, but that's all, 9 months, the whole thing.
Any objection? Seeing none, that amendment passes. Anybody else have anything to offer on this one? Okay, before we take a vote, I think we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Just bringing the assembly back in because we have to be watching our time, folks. We're running out of time. So we have, are you all done with your motions?
Yes, sir,
So-
ma'am, I am.
So we are back to the main motion as amended. And is anybody confused on what the main motion as amended is, or do we have it? Well, Gadok, are you good? Thumbs up? All right. Any objection to the main motion? All right, we're just going to note the objection at this time. We're not going to take any testimony. So Madam Clerk, you have a motion as amended and objection.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Gladys
Yes.
Walakina,
No.
Ms. Treem,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion fails, 3 yeas, 5 nays.
All right, so moving on. To item 15, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06 BAF. An ordinance transferring $30,000 from information technology to community development for a GIS technician.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
CBJ's GIS technician position is currently split funded between the information technology and the police department. To better align the work of the technician with community development's GIS program objectives, this ordinance would transfer the remaining fiscal year 23 authority for the IT funded portion of this position to CDD while maintaining staffing levels to JPD. This position will be included in CDD's FY24 budget request. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and I have no public testimony on this. So we will go to the Assembly, Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06 BAF and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 16, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06 BAG. An ordinance appropriating $93,336 to the manager for a grant to Travel Juneau. Funding provided by hotel bed tax funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The hotel bed tax fund has accumulated a sizable balance as a result of a much higher than anticipated tax revenue. Had this revenue been foreseen during the budget process, the annual assembly grant issued to Travel Juneau for the purpose of tourism marketing would likely have been significantly larger. As such, this ordinance would make a supplemental grant to Travel Juneau for the 2023 fiscal year. Travel Juneau will use this additional grant to reimburse $93,336 of expenses associated with the 2022 Ironman Alaska event. These expenses include facility and equipment rentals, Ironman staff lodging, JPD and CCFR staff time, and an economic impact analysis of the event. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We have one public member of the public signed up for that. Please bring over Ms. Hart. Ms. Hart, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carla Hart. I'm on the back loop. I appreciate you all sticking in so long. I urge you not to give this money to Travel Juneau. If there's a surplus of money in the account from the bed taxes, it might be time to either look at adjusting the bed tax back down, perhaps with the increase in pricing. We don't need the increase in the percent rate, which discourages independent tourism, or to give a tax holiday during legislative session so that Alaskans who travel to Juneau as the capital city aren't paying the whole bed tax that they are. The Ironman is a for-profit business. Travel Juneau, when they agreed to host Ironman, said that they would cover the costs of Ironman, that they decided to buy lodging and other infrastructure for a for-profit business. Seems to be their problem and not yours. I encourage you to not give this money to Travel Juneau, as well funding a study so that they can show that they made money or whatever happened with the Ironman when it was an event that was too big for Juneau to host. It seems a better use of that money, if you were going to study, would be to look at what the optimal event for Juneau would be, instead of giving them feathers to say how much money they brought to Juneau with an event one time off. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Hart? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. And that's all the testimony we had. So we will bring it back to the assembly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06 BAG and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Okay, we will try and get through what we can. So our next item of business is the Augustus Brown Pool request for supplemental agreement. And I will have to pass over the gavel to Ms. Gladaszewski and recuse myself.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Manager, have anything to comment on? We have read the memo.
Deputy Mayor, we would be looking for a motion at the bottom of the memo and packet page 38 to support a supplemental agreement to the Augustus Brown Swimming Pool project in the amount of $828,592 by motion.
Any questions for the manager, Ms. Treem? Oh, you have a motion, Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move that we forward a supplemental agreement to add the locker. No, we already forwarded it. I move that we direct the manager to add a supplemental agreement to add the locker renovations to the Augustus Brown Swimming Pool, mechanical and electrical upgrades contract in the amount of $828,592 and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections to that motion? Hearing no objection. Madam Mayor, you are welcome to come back. Staff reports. Oh, got your own.
Mayor and Deputy Mayor, you have your legislative capital priority list as amended at the committee of the whole last Thursday in your red folder. We would look for a motion to adopt those priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Do I, Ms. Gladaszewski?
I would move the FY24 legislative capital priorities as amended with North Douglas Crossing ranked number 2. Ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection?
I would object just for a quick comment.
Go ahead, Ms.
I would object if you have those in front of you, the Telephone Hill redevelopment project mentions various things associated with Telephone Hill, including demolition of existing structures. And there's been a request from someone who lives on Telephone Hill that might say possible demolition, since we haven't been through a process actually deciding what's going to happen with that. And I spoke with the manager about this earlier, and he understands what I'm asking, and he might have a comment to that.
Mr. Manager, do you have a comment, or are we just going to make that change?
Mayor, we'll just make that change in our solicitation for professional services. Ask that people contemplate a leave it as is option.
All right, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Oh, the new list does have the Bartlett Behavioral Health.
Yeah.
Thank you. No more anything I have to say.
All right, any objection? Seeing none, that is adopted.
I could move.
Moving on to our goals, Ms. Gladaszewski.
I would move that the assembly adopt its 2022-2023 assembly goals. Finally, adoption, and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, those are adopted. Mr. Manager, do we have enough time to talk about the employer sponsored dependent care account?
Mayor, I think we could do that another time. I think we've got to get to executive session.
All right, thank you for that. And we'll go for a request for assembly direction on conducting the October 3rd regular municipality. Is that you, Mr. Watt, or is that Ms. McEwen?
Take that,
Quick.
Madam Mayor. So in your packet is a memo, and as I was reviewing the code, there is a provision that requires that we mail out applications for a by mail ballot to all of the permanent absentee voters within Juneau. And then the code, a different portion of the code also calls for the assembly, if it's wanting to conduct an election by mail, that it must pass a motion to do so. So the memo was asking that if the assembly's intent is to conduct the October election as a by mail election, that a motion be passed to do so. That would preempt the need to send out the applications for a by mail ballot if that was the will of the assembly.
All right, thank you. Ms. Gladysevsky, you're eager to do more.
I'd like to do this one because I didn't realize that we didn't change the election code to make this permanent. So the first part would be we move to have a election by mail on October 2023, and that the manager or the attorney work on amending the election code to make that permanent, or to make that clear, since apparently we didn't. Thank you.
All right, any objection? Seeing none, so moved. All right, just quickly for the mayor's report, looking at all the emails that weren't anything to do with tourism, they had to do with trash. So I'm just gonna let you know that I'm having staff draft an appropriation ordinance for supplemental money for Parks and Rec to pick up litter. And I'd also ask the assembly for permission for the manager and I to work with Waste Management to set up, this was a suggestion, an email, CBJ sponsored trash days and other possible solutions. So if anybody, Ms. Hale, you have an objection?
I don't have an objection. I was just wondering, we talked about this at some length in the Public Works and Facilities Committee, and we also talked about perhaps an ad hoc committee, which might actually just roll into the Zero Waste Committee. So I think there's some real possible solutions, that we talked about a bunch of them.
All right, Ms. Treem.
It's on the agenda for Wednesday's Finance Committee meeting too, so we can have probably more discussion about it then.
All right. I am asking permission though to go chat with them. Any objection? Okay. Chat away. And that's all I had, other than remember Southeast Conference is tomorrow and Wednesday, and the transportation is on Thursday. Does anybody have anything pressing on their committee reports or anything? Other than I'm going to lands, Ms. Hughes Candies. You're gonna have a new topic to deal with, and that's Douglas cemeteries.
Yeah.
So we're gonna attach that to you. Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did, because we have the Bartlett joint meeting on Wednesday, just wanted to report out on what their board has done this month. I went to their finance committee meeting on the 13th, and they heard the CEO's 3-phase plan for their financial issues, and then it went to the full board on the 24th, and they've approved it. And I just want you guys to have that information before we meet with them on Wednesday.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In preparation for hopefully Lisa Murkowski bringing millions of dollars to Juneau, I wanted to make a motion to have staff write up an appropriation up to $5 million as a placeholder to secure federal funding for the Civic Center. So just a write-up ordinance so that we can look at it and have something, if we need to have a placeholder, so that we can show that the city has money in, so that we can collect tens of millions of dollars in federal support for this project.
Okay, remember, he's just gonna draft an ordinance.
Just
Now would not-
just a
Now
draft.
would not be the time to discuss the ordinance. When we see the ordinance would be. the
Just
time.
clarifying, we're just asking for permission to draft an ordinance.
Permission
That's
to
fine.
draft Up.
And I
Words
see,
up to 5.
Mr. Manager, and then Wahalgadock, I see your hand.
Mayor, we need to name a fund source. So I would assume fund balance.
I would assume fund balance.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I figured that we would want to discuss it. That's why I was just having a draft ordinance drawn up.
Well, you still need a fund balance on it. So, all right, Wahalgadock, do you have something to report?
Yeah, just really quick. Sorry, I know we're trying to be fast, but the planning commission, I figured I'll want a heads up that they did pass a conditional use permit for the off-road riding park. So 565 acres of CBJ land out at Bridget Cove. And so just a heads up that that's headed our way.
Thank you for that. You have some, no, HRC has some appointments they need to make.
Yes, very quickly, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Tonight at our HRC meeting, we what's the right word? Suggested that Camille Mausch be appointed to the Human Rights Commission with a term beginning immediately and ending May 31st, 2025. And I'd ask that the Assembly support that with unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, she, I think, is appointed.
Yes, thank you. We also suggested Patrick Gornan as appointed to the Building Code Advisory Committee with the term beginning immediately and ending November 30th, 2025. And
Any objection? Seeing none, that pass, and your committee recommends them.
recommends them.
Don't
Thank you.
suggest.
We also recommended Laura Ashe for a term on the Juneau Commission on Sustainability, beginning immediately and ending June 30th, 2026.
Any objection? Seeing none, they are appointed.
Very good. And then we have our LEPC Local Emergency Planning Committee appointments. How is the best to describe it? We had a memo, but it was for Ed Quinto in the firefighter EMS seat, term starting January 1, 2023 till December 31st, 2025. Do I have to, can I appoint at the menu can I do it as the memo stated from the HRC or?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we recommended that the memo for the LEPC with the appointments noted was is supported.
Any objection to the LEPC recommendations? Hearing none, they are appointed.
I have one thing.
Is Mr. Smith, are you done?
Last one is just that we have the empowered board interviews tomorrow, Tuesday at 5:30 via Zoom.
Okay, read all those, read your stuff. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There will be a joint school board assembly meeting to discuss enrollment, et cetera, on Friday, the 3rd of February at noon.
Okay, this is the facilities committee, so.
where it is? Thank you. Where is it? Here. Thank you.
All right.
In the chambers.
Okay,
Inlands Committee will be having a special work session on the 17th. Look for an email soon.
all right. So,
Last part, sorry.
For an email.
okay, so remember tomorrow night, we have joint or all assembly HRC. Wednesday night, we have a joint meeting with Bartlett, followed by a finance committee. So with that, we will go to the executive session. Ms. Dream.
Oh, God.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly recess into executive session to discuss pending CBJ litigation, specifically a candid discussion of the facts and litigation strategies with the municipal attorney, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Any objection from the public? Seeing very little public left, we will go into executive session.
Are we gonna do it here?
I'm sorry.
For those on Zoom, we will be
I need to
ending this portion of the meeting, and we will not be resuming the Zoom live feed.
Oh.